I really don't know exactly where to start with this, but years after this incident, I had a flashback with all the details while talking to my girlfriend on the phone and telling each other our memories. This happened at the beginning of 2023 though. I, a male, 22 at the time, was working as a terminal attendant at one of the biggest airports in Europe. My job description was mostly to give directions to arriving and departing passengers in this airport, as a big city as it was, to solve their problems, to solve visa and passport related problems, stuff like this. Now, for some reasons I can't tell you exactly which airport it is, but you can probably guess from the details that I'll give. Since the airport is actually really huge and in a very key location, it is one of the transfer points for passengers coming and going from Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. So it was in the nature of my job to encounter very strange types of people and events. I was working 12-hour shifts at this point, some days at night and some days during the day, and the area that I was working in was determined by daily assignments. This incident happened during my 12th-hour night shift on the transfer floor for the airport, the common point where international passengers wait for passport control before picking up their luggage, and where the passengers of all incoming international flights flow. Actually, when we work, we're supposed to wait at the fixed point when passengers don't specifically call for us, but it was like 3 o'clock at night, and since flights and passenger traffic slow down at that time of night, I decided to patrol around a bit. I left my station and went to the gate of the only arrival flight at that time of night. I decided to wait there in case passengers needed help when the gate opened. After a while, the plane pulled up to the gate. The gate opened, and a lot of normal-looking people walked out of the gate and into the transfer center. All except that woman. That strange-looking woman who, honestly, made me feel cursed by the cold January air. She was a brunette in her late 20s, covered in dirt and torn clothes. Her hair was missing in some places, and the hair that was there was rather unkempt and I think a bit burnt as well. When she saw me in my uniform, with unusually large pupils, she walked up to me, looked scared and confused. "Excuse me, do you work here? I need help." Of course you need help. I wanted to take her arm because she was having trouble walking, but the smell emanating from her, don't judge, it wasn't a normal sweat smell, but it smelled like she was already dead, made my nose hurt, and I immediately abandoned the idea. I sat her down on a seat reserved for passengers, and I stood opposite her and asked her in a calm voice how I could help her. "I had a very bad experience. That's why I'm running away from there. I haven't eaten for days, and I think that there was something in the water they gave me on the plane. Since I drank it, I don't feel well, and my mind is all fuzzy." I didn't find what she was saying convincing. I thought that she was in some kind of mental breakdown because her gestures and intonations when she spoke were very strange. But I was also familiar with the aviation rules, and I knew that something like this should be reported immediately to the police. When I told her this, she did not like the idea, and she stood up and shook me by the shoulders and shouted, "No police, never the police." Dude, she started laughing too, looking up at the ceiling like there was something up there. The woman was making strange gestures with her hands, but her cheerful demeanor was broken by a sudden burst of crying. "No police, they won't like it." "You mean they? The police? But that's their job." "Who said anything about the cops? I'm talking about the people who did this to me." As she said this, she lifted up the burnt hair that had fallen on her forehead, and I saw one of the strangest things that I've ever seen. Look, I've seen a lot of strange tattoos because of the environment that I studied and lived in, but this was different. Right in the center of her forehead was a tattoo that looked like the barcodes on the products in the grocery store, with some numbers underneath. At first, I thought it was just a strange fashion sense, or maybe something for aesthetic purposes, but her strange behavior in some documentaries that I had seen made me think that it was probably used by, well, human traffickers to mark people, so that they could be easily identified and caught when they escaped. When she realized that I couldn't help her the way that she wanted, she at least wanted to use my phone, but I told her that she was not allowed to use my phone due to the airport security rules, and that she could use the payphones if she wanted to. Of course, she didn't have any money with her, and I was also not allowed to give her any money. Since she showed aggressive behavior towards me every time I insisted on talking to the police, I finally decided to do it secretly and brought her some food and water before going to the cops. When I arrived at the police station, on the transfer floor, the policemen were taking advantage of the calm of the night to just rest, and when I told them what had happened to me and pointed to the woman, they told me that she was just one of the refugees coming into our country. My country hosts so many illegal immigrants and refugees that it is normal for them to think like that, and that she was acting like that because she wanted us to let her enter illegally. They didn't take it very seriously, in other words, and unfortunately, I just had to leave without any solution. When I went back to the woman, I realized that she had not touched the food and water that I had brought her, and repeatedly refused to consume them with fear in her eyes. I decided to have a conversation with the woman, so as not to be too judgmental. When I asked her her name, she gave me a very strange answer that I'd never heard before. It was like a name from some ancient language, and even now I don't remember exactly what she said. When I asked her where she came from and where she was going, she said that she didn't know. To get this information, I took her passport and her boarding pass from her hand. I don't remember exactly, but she was coming from an Asian country and her next destination was not written on the boarding pass, so her ticket was valid only until here, which was very strange. At this point, I decided to end our conversation, which was not very productive in the first place, and leave her alone to observe from a distance. I had to go back to my station for some paperwork anyway, and decided to take care of it in the meantime. Later that night, at around 6 a.m., my other colleague was due to arrive at the station to hand in my shift. I was going to exit through the door, where they were going to enter to the transfer center, where we were, and before I left, I decided to stop by again on my way to see this strange female visitor. When I went up to her, she was holding a book in her hand. It was a book with old covers and yellowed paper, but I didn't understand what was written in it until she pointed at me and called me over. Even then, I didn't understand it. It was a book written in a language that I didn't know, and I don't want you to think that I was making it up, but it was a book with strange figures of people and other drawings. The woman pointed to one of the drawings and said, "This is how they do this." "They do what like this?" I was confused. "Can you be a bit more specific?" When I said that, she shook her head from side to side laughing. She had an expression as if I wouldn't understand even if she explained it. I then told her that a friend of mine would be arriving soon in my place, and that if she had any problems or needs, that she could contact them as she wished. I gave her directions to the restroom, where she could get food, the police station, and the ticket office. After a few seconds of looking at my face, she then thanked me in tears and took my hands in both of hers and looked me in the eyes. I didn't know exactly what had happened to her, but at that moment, my heart honestly broke, and I put my other hand over hers and I nodded. It was time to leave when my friend who was coming behind me to take my place touched me, and I introduced them to the woman and secretly informed them about the situation. My friend told me that they were going to take special care of her, said goodbye, and I finished my shift for the day. When I woke up the next day, I texted my friend and I asked them how she was doing. They told me that after I introduced them to her, they left to take care of another passenger, and that after that they never saw her for the rest of the day. They said that when they asked the passport police and ticket officers, that they told them that they were busy enough as it was, and that they didn't pay that much attention to people and brushed him off again. I never did see this woman on my next shift, and I never heard from her again. But the whole situation, it still gives me the goosebumps when I remember it. I would be interested in your thoughts about the incident though. If there's anything that I missed, or if you want to ask any questions, then please do, because I want to know what this was all about, and I really want to know if she's okay. This happened to me 15 years ago when I was 13, and it still gives me the chills. For context, I grew up on a cattle ranch in the middle of the Great Plains in the US, a very remote area, and our house was right in the middle of pastures, where our cattle lived about 5 miles down a gravel road from a 2-lane blacktop. The closest neighbor was at least 2 miles away, another rancher. The closest gas station, about 17. In short, we were a long ways from anywhere, and it's a very independent lifestyle for sure. When live cattle get bought or sold in areas like that, they are transferred by semi-trucks with these huge trailers. Some of you may have even seen one sometime. Many of the people in that business own their own trucks and operate independently, picking up loads from buyers or sellers, as jobs come mainly by word-of-mouth relationships. Background checks are pretty much non-existent. Lots of under-the-table payments, and as such, the community of drivers can be notoriously sketchy, I guess you could say. Many are very good people, just doing their job, but some are big meth abusers, making them sort of unpredictable, I guess. The meth abuse typically starts as a side effect to working very long hours and going on long hauls alone so often. This all begins with my parents leaving for the weekend to take my little sister on a trip to Dallas. My dad, he had a load of cattle coming in from Nebraska scheduled to arrive around midnight, and this was the first time that I would be home alone to take in cattle like this myself. The process is simple enough. I mean, they just back into a load chute and drop off the cattle while the receiver counts them and signs a slip confirming that they all arrived. So I wasn't too worried. I had been around my dad doing it many times anyway. My dad did give me good instructions, though, to not tell whoever showed up as the trucker that I was there alone, which, honestly, I believed helped me out a lot later. Anyways, they leave for Dallas, and I wait around until midnight, then start watching up towards the dirt road that I know the guy was supposed to be coming in on, and I don't end up getting a glimpse of his truck lights until at least 1 a.m. When I finally see him off in the distance on that road, he stops completely and sits there for like 30 minutes. All I can see is his truck and trailer lights, and no one comes out there, so I know it's him. When he finally starts moving again, I go out to meet him at the landing chute and help him line his trailer up to back up. This guy steps out once he gets backed up and easily weighs about 300 pounds, and he is one of the dirtiest people that I had ever laid my eyes on. Quite honestly, I don't think that he had changed his clothes in days, and had spilled food and drinks and cow poop all over himself. He started to talk about being late in very random directions, kind of rambling nonsense. No clue what he was trying to say exactly, but he may have been drunk and having a hard time keeping his excuse together. He mentioned a flat tire and also running low on diesel, then something about animals on the road or whatever. He eventually asked how old I was, though, and when I told him, he said, "Mighty young to be out here dealing with this. You need to be somewhere out there chasing some girls. Do you like girls or boys?" "Don't matter to me none. I like both." And I was thinking, what the heck? But told him definitely women. Growing up around a lot of blue-collar guys, I wasn't a stranger to raunchy talk, but this was one of the crazier things anyone had ever directed towards me. He then went into an absolute unhinged story about chasing women when he was young back in Missouri, apparently. And the gist of it was that he'd been hooking up with a girl that he met at a bowling alley for months at one point until one day he went to his family reunion and she was there, apparently. Turns out that they were second cousins, but that didn't bother us none. We kept doing it for another year. I've hardly said a thing at this point, and he'd been talking to me for at least 20 minutes. Once he gave me a gap, I said, "Hey, we should probably unload these, yeah?" and said my mum was back at the house and would probably wonder what was taking so long. He grumbled a bit while making some crazy sexual remarks and some comments, then climbed up onto the loading area to open his back gate. These cattle trailers are huge, mind you, and have a lot of different compartments inside them. Putting a few cattle in at a time in bunches, then shutting them in the compartments makes loading them easier, and they're also safer on journeys because it prevents them running all over each other. This one, for instance, had 6,700-pound cattle on there. So, he let off that first group and I counted them, and then he got into the trailer and opened up the next compartment and let off that bunch. For the third compartment, he was in there shaking the gate around and grumbling nonsense, and then starts yelling out to me that he needs me to come in and help him. I was already very sketched out by being alone near this very perverted dude, but this threw my alarm bells off completely. I mean, you have to understand that never have I once had any trucker ask me or seen anyone else be asked to go onto a trailer with them, and this huge dude was clearly just trying to get me into that tight space. I told him that I needed to stay outside to count, and then he shook it a bit more and tried to get me to come in there again, said that he really needed a hand. I told him that I'm not getting in the trailer with him, and he needed to figure it out. After a lot more back and forth with this, he finally opened the gate. Those came off and had 2 more compartments left that he tried the same routine with both of them. I just kept saying, no way, man, but honestly, I was freaking out a bit. By the time that we finally had all of the cattle off, he was in a much less happy mood and started calling me all sorts of names for not helping him. He then tried to get next to me to jump into his truck to grab the paperwork that I needed to sign from his glove box, and I again had to bicker with him about grabbing it himself as I was not turning my back on this guy for even a moment. He eventually caved, got the paper, I signed it and told him to head out, and I was going home. I ran back over to the house, which was like 100 yards away, and I watched him from the front window sit out there for an hour, as I didn't want to go to sleep until I knew that he had left. Finally, though, he pulled off, and by that time I went to sleep. It was around 4 a.m. What should have been a 20-minute interaction turned into a super creepy attempted who knows what by some deliverance type trucker, and I am so glad that I never ever thought about getting into that trailer. The point of me sharing this story is to illustrate just how quickly a hike can turn into a potentially life-threatening scenario that takes you off of the trail. So back during COVID, a friend of mine who was an experienced backpacker invited me to go on a 3-day hike with him in Bankhead National Forest, Alabama. I had never really hiked before and had no equipment, but he told me exactly what I needed, and we went to REI to buy equipment. I bought about $600 worth of stuff, including a backpack, camel pack, hammock, tarp, emergency equipment, rations, etc. Now, before we left, we weighed our packs and we both had about 40 pounds of gear, which he said was a little on the heavier side but safer. We printed out some maps of the forest that included trails and streams. We planned a 22-mile hike over 3 days, giving us time to fish because we were really into fishing at the time. The first day went by fine. It was 98 degrees and humid, typical for summer in Alabama. He told me to take a sip from my camel pack every 2 minutes, and really drilled that into me, so I followed that rule religiously. We hiked 7.5 miles and set up for the night. We saw a deer swimming down the river, which was pretty neat. But the second day, that was when things went wrong. We fished a bit in the morning and saw a 4-foot long-nosed gar, which was pretty cool. Then we went hiking further upstream. It was almost 100 degrees at this point, and by noon we were running pretty low on water, so we looked at the map and planned to get more at the next stream. However, the next stream was dried up. Over the course of the afternoon, we carried on from stream to stream, only to find all of them were dried up. We got desperate and checked the map for off-trail streams, and went about a half-mile off-trail to find one that seemed promising, but it was mostly mud. We were so desperate for water, though, that we attempted to pump from the muddy water with our filters, but in the end, it ended up clogging up our filters. We were in a really bad spot, half a mile off trail, 5 miles from the last water source, and it was already almost evening at this point. So, we abandoned the original hike plan and made a mad dash back to the last known water location. By the time that we got there, it was almost dark. I was feeling a bit exhausted, I'll admit, but otherwise fine. However, my friend, who was the experienced one, mind you, started vomiting and trembling uncontrollably. He couldn't drink water without immediately throwing it up, and couldn't stand or really even move without his muscles contracting, in what he described as the most painful thing that he had ever felt. I set up both of our hammocks and picked him up and placed him in his. We had no cell reception, it was dark, and we still had 6 miles to go to get back to where we needed to get to. The next day, he was a little bit better, but it took a very long time to make the hike back as he was constantly stopping to rest or to throw up. It was quite a battle to get back to where we needed to go, but eventually we found our way. This shows, though, that even if you are experienced, your situation can go from routine to, well, literally dying and unable to function in less than a day. If I wasn't with him, he probably would have died, perhaps off of the trail deliriously searching for water or something. I am now sure that many of these cases involve someone suffering from dehydration, hypoglycemia, or low electrolytes, driving them to go off trail in confusion, and unfortunately, to die. I have always been a staunch atheist and not a believer in the paranormal at all, but I saw something in Albania, and I cannot get it out of my head. I would like to start this off with a bit of a history lesson too. So, during the Second World War, Albania was occupied by the Nazis. After the Second World War, Albania decided that the best way to fend off fascism in the future was to become a communist and isolationist country. They closed their borders in 1946 and declared themselves the world's first atheist nation in 1967. Religion was outlawed in 1967, and religious buildings were repurposed or destroyed. Previously, Albania was a mix of primarily Catholicism and Islam, and just because it was not legal does not mean a person will stop practicing their faith, right? Catholics were seen as a special threat due to a perceived loyalty to the Holy See over the state. Shkoda, a city in northern Albania, housed a prison that held and tortured practitioners of Catholicism. Many people died there too, and they refused to give up fellow practitioners under extreme forms of torture. Now, this prison is a part of the museum called the Site of Witness and Memory. The first part details the events leading up to and following the outlawing of religion by Enver Hoxha, and the second part, well, that details what went on in the prison. At the end, you are permitted to walk into the prison and its cells, and on the bottom floor, some cells display prominent people who were held there and resistance in the face of a concentration camp. Others display anti-religious propaganda, and some tell stories of camp conditions and how information was shared throughout the camp. Most of the cells are empty, but you can walk inside of them. Each measure about 5 feet by 5 feet, and the last room is much larger. It is where the inmates were brought for questioning. The original desk, typewriter, and telephone are all still there, as well as a chair where the inmates would have sat. Now, there is a second story to the prison, and I went upstairs to check it out. But all of the cells were empty, and to be sure I didn't miss anything, I poked my head into each one as I made my way down the hallway. Once I was sure the cells were empty, I began to walk back to go downstairs, when, out of the corner of my eye, in one of the cells, I swear to you that I catch a black figure. I caught a surprising amount of detail for only catching a glance, but it was about 5'6", emaciated, and was standing head against the corner, hands on its face and facing away from me. Pure black and with shadows spreading out away from it. At first, I genuinely thought that it was a cardboard cutout that I had missed, so I took a couple of steps back to check, but when I did, the room was completely empty. I was also overtaken by a sudden sense of what I can only describe as pure fear. I wasn't in any danger, I guess, but I don't think that I was ever that scared before. In fact, I ran out of that museum. I'm sure I got a couple of odd looks from security and other attendees, but quite honestly, I really didn't care at that point. And ever since then, I just have not been able to shake what I saw. I don't think I believe in the paranormal, but I also just have no explanation as to what I saw. It looked and it felt very real. I came across this place and I just thought that you guys might have some answers, and so that's why I'm here and I'm sharing this. Is there more to this life than just the physical, or was I just going crazy at the time and seeing things? This happened about 21 years ago when I was around 9 years old, but I still vividly remember that day. So I was with my grandmother and her dog, a big black Great Dane. We were walking on the side of a little country road in the middle of the woods. It was about a 20-minute walk from my house, and we used to come here for picking up chestnuts a lot. At some point, the dog went a little further into the woods and I started to follow him. At the same time, a car arrived on the road and stopped. I looked at my grandma and she made a sign to tell me to stay where I was. I saw her talking with the driver. He looked like a middle-aged man. From where I was, I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I heard my grandma raise her voice. I saw the man open his car door. I was sure that he was about to grab my grandmother, and I was terrified. She screamed to me to run into the woods, but a big dark shadow ran into the guy. It was the dog. I think he must have heard the panic in my grandma's voice and that he understood that there was danger. The guy obviously got scared and quickly closed the car door, and then he peeled out of there. I asked my grandmother what happened, and she just told me that he was a crazy man and that we should go home through the woods and stay away from the road. She also told me to stay close to the dog, and thankfully we got home and didn't see the man again. From that day on, though, we never went picking up chestnuts in that area again, and we stopped doing the walkings around the house for many years after that too. We never went walking anywhere else without a dog as well, and I think that's also why I remember this day so precisely. And even if I never saw that man again, he left after him a feeling of danger around my home for a very long time. An encounter that was only a few minutes long turned into years of fear and anxiety for all of us. A fun fact too is that, despite his size, that dog was usually a completely harmless dog who basically got scared of everything, even cats or chickens. But that day, he was honestly the bravest dog on Earth. So, I was trying to sleep in my dorm the other night, but for some reason I just couldn't. Then, out of nowhere, I felt movement from underneath me, so distinct that I honestly thought that it was my pet snake. I put my flashlight on and saw that she was in her tank, so I laid back down and closed my eyes, still fully awake and now a bit uneasy. Mind you, because I've been asked about this, I was completely sober, no weed, alcohol, or anything. But then, my door, that was completely shut, opened on its own. I have 3 roommates, but one was at her boyfriend's, and I heard the other 2 talking faintly and far away in the living room. And then, after a few seconds, some kind of force smacked me in the left eye, and I see a flash of white. I get up, arm in the air, ready to start swinging, and the door instantly closes. Doesn't slam, but definitely closes. I turn the flashlight on, radically swinging it around, looking for anything, but nobody's in the room and there's really nothing there. I get up and immediately open the door and hear my roommates again from the back of the apartment in the living room, maybe 15 steps away. I didn't hear running, walking, breaking, nothing. I asked them if someone came into my room and smacked me, and they both said no. I explained what happened, and they both said that they heard the door open and close, but neither went into my room. I believe that they didn't touch me because, one, I didn't see or hear anyone come in, and admittedly my room was messy, so in the dark I would have heard them step on a thing or two before getting to the bed. And two, it's incredibly out of character of them if they did. We're friends, but roommates nonetheless, and we won't go into each other's rooms if the doors are closed. And we especially don't hit or smack each other, nor was I or anyone in a fight or bad place with each other at this point. I'm freaked out, I won't lie, and I guess I'm looking for a rational explanation for what this is, because the alternative, well, that scares me. I want to share something profound that happened to me when I was a teenager in 2008. So I grew up in a haunted house in a town near Seattle. The houses of my suburb, they were surrounded by evergreens and large rhododendrons, which made each home seem private and secretive. Another day I'll share some more experiences. Spooky stuff happened to me all the time, but never to any of my family members. I saw shadow people, astrally projected, but cannot anymore sadly. Had an imaginary friend who manifested to me as real as any other person. I also had a terrifying year where a demon tormented me. At times, my friends would see the phenomenon as well. But when I was a kindergartner, 5 to 6 in the States, I met my best friend Lenore. We instantly became friends till the end. Thick as thieves, we were each other's rocks until the age of 16. Lenore, she suffered from severe depression and also thoughts of self-deletion, despite being a straight-A student. Artistically and musically, she was very talented, and she was popular. Not to mention she was absolutely gorgeous. Her family was comfortable with multiple vacations per year, some of which I was invited to. It just really goes to show that mental illness can strike anyone from any background. But she had witnessed some of the spooky stuff that went down at my house, as she was there frequently. My mum was closer to her than her own as well. My home was a short walk from our high school and tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac. Therefore, it was a frequent hangout spot for my friends, especially since my mum was mellow and welcoming. Now, one day in June, I was walking to my house with Lenore after school got out at around 2 p.m. The weather was sunny, warm and clear, quiet, beautiful and unassuming. As we walked side by side down a long street, Lenore suddenly stopped in her tracks. I looked over at her, and her face was blanched white, eyes wide open and her mouth agape in an O shape. She was staring in shock down the street at something. I followed her gaze to look at the crossroads about maybe a half a block away, and at a light pole stood a peculiar figure, dressed in a black tuxedo, black top hat, cane and cape. There was a tall man standing there. When my eyes found him, he flourished his cape, tipped his hat, bowed, and then disappeared as if he had winked out of existence. Lenore looked at me flabbergasted. We both agreed that we had seen the figure. And the next 3 nights, I dreamt of that gentleman. He appeared to me in the darkness next to a gondola. I was told that he would take me to the other side if I would just pay the price. Each night I pleaded with him, saying that I needed to live. He was never pushy, though. He never scared me. He was calm, quiet, and seemed understanding. He just said that he would offer his services if I ever needed them after telling him no. On the fourth day, though, Lenore, well, unfortunately, she ended her life. I never dreamt of the gentleman again after that, and I've always wondered if he visited her the same way that he came to me. Was his offer too much to handle for someone so deeply sad and scared? And has anyone else seen him? I was severely damaged by Lenore's untimely death. It took me years to claw my way out of a pit of despair that it brought me to. If you're ever in a similar position, then please do reach out if you're hurting to the point of wanting to end it all. Life is hard, everyone is struggling, but you are loved and you are important. Thanks for listening to this, and if you have any idea as to what that gentleman was, what he could have been, then please do share. One night in 2013, I went over to my cousin's house when I was probably about 13 to 14. This was in California. We were the same age, and she had just moved in with her step-siblings and stepdad with her mum. They were in a transition moving period, and her room was basically in the living room at this point. The only thing separating it was a curtain. It was weird, but not permanent. So me, her, Sav, and our other cousin Trinity were all at the kitchen table talking about, well, just random stories, I guess. The living room and kitchen were all open. Sav's room was about 10 feet away from where we were. My cousin Sav at that time period was going through it really bad mentally. She kept having really bad sleep paralysis of these grey-looking people with greasy black hair hugging her in her sleep and staring at her. I kept getting the feeling that she had something attached to her. I have always been really spiritual, along with most of the women in my family. When I would bring it up to her, she'd get mad at me though and tell me to just drop it. So I did. But back to this night, it was probably about 7 p.m. and we had just ate some pizza. Me and Trinity, we were talking about whatever, and all of a sudden, all of the lights in the house shut off for probably 1 second and went back on. We all sort of screamed in unison. No clue why, but I felt extremely compelled to look over to where my cousin's room or curtain was. And that was when I saw this, I would say 5'10" figure. Keep in mind, it's dark out but not pitch black, and we all had the lights on where we were. In other words, we could see clear as day. I just remember the dead silence, and I see this man, and he seemed to have been old, 1800s, 1900s, brownish attire, I would guess. He had a top hat on, but his skin was just completely grey. It looked like someone made a clay figure with real clay. It had human features, but I couldn't make out what I was looking at, really. What I do remember, though, is that I had a pit in my stomach. Like, this thing wanted me to know that it did not want me there. I was sort of in awe, though, staring at it for probably 5 to 10 seconds in silence. All it did was stand there, but all I could feel was disgust, anger, fear, basically any negative human emotion. It just washed over me all of a sudden. After I snapped back to look at my cousin, they were both pale and in shock too. I asked them if they saw what I just did, and apparently they had. To this day, they still remember it too, so I know that I'm not crazy or was just seeing things. We all described the same thing, and at that, I wanted to get the heck out of there. I near started crying because I felt so uncomfortable and weirded out, and called my mum to come and pick me up, but she would be about an hour or two to get me, as she was with friends, and we ended up watching movies, and eventually I fell asleep. I just remember right before, though, how scared I was that I would see it again. I never did, mind you, but years later I met my boyfriend, whose parents described seeing a clay-textured skin humanoid, all grey skin, and it was that same icky feeling. So, has anyone else ever experienced seeing something like this? This was my first vivid paranormal experience, and it seriously shook me. And when I think about it, I still cannot believe that we all saw the same thing. Hand on my heart, this happened. And so, what the heck was it? I mean, I saw it. My cousin had sleep paralysis dreams with the same grey-skinned people. Faces molded like clay, but not quite perfect. My boyfriend's family apparently saw it too, and the whole thing is just so strange. Me and my boyfriend live in an old building, a studio apartment, and before it was an apartment, it was a room in a mental institution. Crazy, I know. So, my dream started out that we moved into an apartment. Wasn't the same one that we lived in now, and we had a blessing or housewarming. When everything was over, my mum and my grandma stayed to put things away, such as gifts, pots, pans, etc. I picked up a box and turned my body and saw through a window, like through another building, was a lady looking straight at me. Now, this isn't the first time me seeing a creepy person in my dreams, but I was telling myself that she's not real, it's just a dream, so I turned away and calmed down. All in my dream, mind you. Trying to have a nice little dream, I guess. I eventually looked up again and saw her through another window. Keep in mind in my dream that the window wasn't on that wall. I made eye contact and she came at me full speed and just started choking me. I woke up eyes open, but for some reason I couldn't move, and still was seeing her directly on top of me and was just choking me. It was like I woke up and started coughing or choking on my saliva or something. According to my boyfriend, I looked like I was held against my will with my eyes rolled back, but my eyelids struggling to be open and I couldn't breathe. My boyfriend, obviously freaked out, started shaking me because, well, fun fact, when we started dating, I told him sometimes when I sleep, if I tap him continuously, which is the best that I can do when these things happen, is to shake me awake. And the first time that he shook me, she went away, but I just felt like my eyes were so heavy. My body was falling asleep, but my mind was telling myself to stay awake. Like, I was literally fighting myself to stay awake and not sleep. My eyes fully closed and I saw her again, and she just kept doing it continuously until my boyfriend eventually sat me up and shook me. I then told my mum what happened, and she full-on described how she looked from head to toe and told my boyfriend that I have a weak soul and that I'm an easy target, that I should sleep on the outside because that's an easy access. The bed is against the wall and outside, meaning I'm not sandwiched between him and the wall. Since then, my boyfriend always sleeps on the outside, thankfully, and weirdly enough, I haven't had any other incidences like this. I don't fully understand exactly what all this is, but all I know is that if it is sleep paralysis, then it is the weirdest form of it that I've ever heard about. This happened to my late aunt, circa 8-9 years ago. My aunt, Rose, then in her late 50s, lived alone since the death of my grandma in 2004. She has lived in her room for pretty much all of her life. She never married and never had kids. The house she lived in was newly renovated in 2012 because the old 1960s house was falling apart. The turning point, though, was when the ceilings dropped into my aunt's bedroom while my aunt was away. Thankfully, it didn't happen when she was sleeping. The house used to house 2 big families with maids, and at its glory time, it was housing about 16 people. My great-grandma, grandpa, grandma, cousin of grandpa, my aunt, uncle, dad, and little aunt, among others, all lived there. One by one, the family moved out or passed away in the house, but, well, the house was almost fully renovated, but still preserving the room and layout of the old house, so you could still recognize that it was the same house. Now, there have been countless paranormal-related events happening to my aunt at this place, but she's really not the type of person who freaked out easily, so she didn't talk about it too much. Among others, there was slightly moved furniture and makeup kits, listening to people breathing on her ears or some giggling. Also, seeing big non-human heads outside of her window. Everything was considered normal in my country, well, all except for that last one. Now, one normal day, my aunt just entered her room after work, and she got pushed hard towards the wall. Her left shoulder hit some furniture, a sturdy 100-year-old teak cabinet made by my great-grandpa, and she fell down. She was taken aback by this, got mad and yelled at the unknown, "Hey, I know you live here, but I lived here first, before you. Let's just be civil and don't disturb each other." The weird thing is that my aunt seemed to know that there was another being living in her room, a lady with long hair apparently, usually only sitting under the ceiling behind the door in her room. You can believe it or not, but according to some people they can see this. I'm taking it with a grain of salt personally, but the aftermath of the incident was very clear. My aunt, she definitely was hurt. She was unable to raise her left arm past her shoulder anymore after the incident, and the reason why she told us was only because she was complaining about her arm, not about the paranormal experience itself. The ghost, whoever that was though, apparently they had won, because my aunt passed away on the porch in 2017 of a heart attack soon after this event. The house, it now sits empty, and to be honest, I really don't want it. This incident is one of a few that have truly stuck with me over the years. Although this took place in January of the previous year, it definitely keeps me awake at night. It seems surreal to me that so many weird things happen to people on a daily basis, and I'd never imagined them happening to me either. But I was staying abroad due to college, and there wasn't a single thing that had irked me or creeped me out since being here. I lived in a relatively populated area. There were a lot of young women in my apartment, and even older women as well. So I guess you could say that I felt safe in my own home. Walking the streets was also safe, since there were always people around. There were apartments, parks, houses, those full-time 7-Elevens and small cafes. I'm pretty sure there was a small motel too. But regardless, it creates a pretty decent image of the area, and it was a pretty safe area. Now, although the university taught the lessons in English for all the foreign students, I still wanted to learn the language in respect and experience the culture. It was fun, and I made quite a few friends in those classes too. And well, one day I was walking to a convenience store from the class. I remember being quite dazed and tired. It was around 8 p.m. The class ended a while back, but since I had the once-in-a-lifetime leisure time, I decided to explore the place. I knew my way around, and I was feeling pretty confident about the routes and all. As time passed, I walked and reached this giant road with some empty plots to the right. Don't get me wrong, it was a residential area, and I could even hear noises from a couple of houses, but it probably wasn't the wisest choice, I admit. Now, this is where it gets a little bit weird. You see, there's a bunch of houses, but as you keep walking towards the city and all the hustle and bustle, there is this entire secluded area of just road and streetlights. The convenience store was like 4 kilometers away approximately. I was feeling uncomfortable and very nervous too because of the previous incident that I had, so I decided to stop and sort of look around a bit. There was nothing, but I decided to start jogging further, while looking side to side and back a little bit too. And not even 30 seconds pass and I bump into someone. I felt a feeling of dread rush over me and my hair just stood up. My palms started shaking and I didn't even lift my head up to see who it was. I apologized like crazy, simultaneously backing away and getting ready to bolt out of there like I was Usain Bolt in the Olympics or something. The person, they came in front of me though, started walking towards me in little steps, and started moving in this weird swaying motion. It was almost like a cartoon, and while swaying, the person just said, "What the heck? What are you? Are you okay?" with this really arrogant tone. I say person because I genuinely couldn't tell if this person was a man or a woman. Their face was covered by a mask, and they wore a large hoodie with sweatpants. The voice was sort of muffled, but didn't sound masculine or feminine, to be honest. The person started swearing and doing the weird swaying motion while reaching in their pant pocket, and that was when I caught a glimpse of something shiny, and my instincts that so conveniently died out suddenly kicked in. I took the chance and fled that place quickly. I went to the store and told the clerk. They called the police, who found 2 shoes on the same spot, and along with the shoes was the mask, apparently. I never did find out who it was, what they wanted, and how I never saw them lurking around in the empty plots like that. I mean, there were no bushes, and the light wasn't scarce either. I have no idea where this person came from, in fact. But what I can say is that I'm glad that I'm safe. Although this happened a year ago, I still feel like I'm not completely safe. I don't know if it's paranoia or something, but I have been having a bad feeling since the beginning of this month. Even if I am with other people or at home with my boyfriend, I feel like I just have no privacy, like something or someone is watching me. Which is why I'm here. Does anyone know what I should do? So I ordered a board game on Amazon last week, and it got delivered today. I was just sitting on the couch when I get a phone call. The guy doesn't speak my language, but I understand that it's the delivery guy. I reply yes in the language that he was speaking to, "Are you home?" I start to run downstairs because my intercom isn't working while the guy screams on the phone with me to open the door. He then started kicking the building's front door, which made me stop a little bit as I am a girl and both my boyfriend and roommate were upstairs, but I would be going downstairs by myself. When I got there, he had dropped the package on my front step and was now standing far off. He looked sort of distraught though, and his eyes were really red. He asked if the package was for me, and I nodded. I grabbed the package and I just closed the door ASAP. I'm terrified now though that he might come back since, well, he knows where I live. I don't know why he was acting that way. I was as fast as I could be. I mean, there really was no reason to react like that. I don't know. Something about that guy just doesn't feel right. So, the first thing that ever happened to me was when I was 11 years old in 1988. It was when my mother and my aunties had a party one day, and someone called that party and they didn't answer. They were too wasted, and it went to a live answering machine. Plays messages out loud as it's being recorded. As they continued drinking, the answering machine went off, and slow breathing occurred, eventually getting everyone's attention. Then growling so loud that it honestly startled everyone. Frozen and scared while listening to the sounds, and then it ended and all of them freaked out. At 11, I wasn't there, I was at home asleep, but they all decided to go to my mum's house and play the answering machine again. It was so loud that the house felt like it was shaking. But was the house shaking? Who knows, maybe my 11-year-old self just made that up, but I ran downstairs and watched them gathered around an old answering machine, eyes wide, shaking, some of them crying. I freaked out like watching a horror movie, and that's all I really remember. Nothing really happened to anyone. Nothing else really happened to anyone, but it was certainly a freaky message. The second thing was when I was about 13 in 1991. I joined a local gang in my city and became a hooligan. I was at a party, yes, a party again, and the owner of this scum-rooming house on the poorest street of the city was in Winnipeg. A gang member rented it apparently, and The other roommate that lived there wasn't home for like 2 weeks and told this dude to stay out of his stuff. The dude, though, went into his stuff to find things like Polaroids of literal feces. I have no idea what I was staring at, to be honest. Just fleshy turds in jars, I suppose, and a bunch of cassettes with weird writing or symbols, whatever they were. We're all drunk and partying, and the dude plays the cassettes, and the familiar sounds from what I heard when I was 11 starts playing. All of these gangsters start freaking out a bit, fleeing from the place, including me. We never ever went back to that place again as well. The dude who hosted the party was beaten to an inch of his life, and that's all I really know about it. I've told these stories to my wife later in my years, and we took our kids to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie back in the day. It was an animated CGI movie for anyone interested. Anyhow, I don't remember the year, but I know when we came home, my wife played the digital answering machine on speakerphone. And guess what? Yes, that same voice was on there. She literally grabbed the box and ripped it out of the wall at this point. We don't know why, but she just freaked out hearing what I told her about for years, and she believes me now, that's for sure. And about 7 years ago was the last time, and it was a live call to my cell phone. I hung up the second that I realized what the call was, and I haven't heard it since. Now, I was watching WF Files, and one of the videos had the exact sound, and my sister and I heard it, and she turned to me and said, "Do you remember what we heard when we were kids?" I said, "Yeah," and she said, "Well, last year it happened to me again." And at that, I decided to look it up finally and see what I could find. I can find by other people's experiences that they can actually receive a phone call from someone that they know. I read a story a mother called her son and he heard the growling or screaming. She heard him hang up and freak out apparently. I found out that this happens a lot in fact, like someone is leaving a message on the answering machine and it sounded like growling or snarling or heavy breathing, but the person is leaving a normal message on their end. I really have no clue what's going on, no idea at all, but it's really scary and hopefully someone who has resources does a video investigating this phenomenon or whatever it is. Or maybe some other people have some ideas as to what this could be. I mean, you feel dread, unrest. It's small, but when you hear what I and others have, it definitely grows into, well, being terrified. I really have no idea what it was, and neither do people on the internet, really. It's a freaky experience, and honestly, I know people are probably going to troll me for this, but I don't really care. It's something that I remember, and something that's always weirded me out. And if you have any idea as to what it is, then please do share, because it's bothered me for all these years. So, I'm kind of looking for advice, but also sharing my experience from last night, and also some from my past. I'm wondering if they're related, I guess. To start, I guess I should say that for the past 5 years or so, I've been suffering from some intense and terrifying sleep paralysis. It has always involved a tall shadowy figure with no other distinct features. The experiences vary, but always end up with me screaming myself awake in an attempt to get somebody to wake me up. Maybe it's related, maybe it's not, but I figure that it could be useful information. Rewind, if you will, to when I was between the ages of 4 and 8. I'm basing that time frame on the house that I lived in at the time. I had a reoccurring nightmare where a tall, brownish-grey, shadowy figure would chase me around my house, which had turned into a dark, foggy, and sort of mossy landscape within the structure of the house. I would always open my eyes and I would see this figure wandering around outside my bedroom, and I would hide behind my door. Then it would come and start peeking through the crack in between the door frame and the door, and start to curl its unnaturally long fingers around the open side of the door. At this point, I would crawl under my bed and let it come into the room, then squeeze out of the other side of my bed and run out of my room and proceed to turn all of the lights on in the house while this thing followed me. I would eventually end up in my parents' bedroom, turn their light on and start screaming as it approached their door. And it was at this point that I would actually wake up and all of the lights would be on in the house. And I mean every single light. Every closet, laundry room, my sister's rooms, bathrooms, etc. Mind you, nothing different ever happened in the dream, but it did occur frequently. And my parents, they have acknowledged that I was constantly sleepwalking, turning on the lights, so I know that that's not a false memory, but I'm not saying that it can't just be a reoccurring nightmare, and that's it. However, the dreams stopped after we moved out of that house, which obviously was very strange. Fast forward though to when I was 10 or 11. There was one late spring day where nothing particularly interesting happened. I went to school, came home, did my homework, played some video games with some friends, and went home to eat some dinner. After dinner, I took our dog for a walk around our neighborhood. I love to go on long walks with our dog at night, and just to listen to the entire Linkin Park Meteora album. However, on this night, my CD player stopped working about halfway into Don't Stay, first full-length song on the album. So I took off my headphones and we kept walking since our dog knew the route that we normally take. About 10 or 15 minutes into our walk, I noticed that the night was, for some reason, unusually quiet. We lived close to a fairly busy main road, and 2 miles from an airport, so ambient traffic and airline noise was really normal here. But this night, I really heard none of it. I look overhead at a plane about to land at the airport, and weirdly, there was zero sound. I can hear our footsteps and my dog's breath, and really that was it. Another plane passes overhead with no sound again. I chalk it up to weather and the wind or something, and I keep walking. Nothing else really eventful happens on the walk or after I get home, but I get into bed and have a deeply sinking feeling right as I drift off into a dreamless sleep. I awake the next morning a little before 5 a.m., 2 hours earlier than normal, and feel like I really didn't sleep at all. It genuinely felt like I stayed up all night long. I felt delirious, foggy, and really shaky. My lower back was itchy, so naturally I went to scratch my itch and noticed 2 roughly quarter-sized scabs directly on my spine, one about a ½ inch above the other. Even as I share this, I can still feel where they were as well. Obviously, I freak out and I tell my mum. She says that they are perfect circles as well and asks what I fell on. Mind you, I didn't fall on or back into anything. I was never laying face down and had something land on me either. There was no blood on any of my shirt as well, which was really strange. They seemed to have just simply appeared, and they were completely gone and healed in 2 days with no scars as well, which, again, it just seems, well, impossible. Anyway, fast forward to last night, a little over 20 years later, and I woke up at 4 a.m. on the dot, wide awake, with the feeling that I was being watched. I sat up in bed and looked around. I didn't see anything worth noticing, so I went outside to get some fresh air for a minute or two and then went back to bed. Right as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something heavy running on our roof. I sat up again to listen for it, but nothing more happened. So I went back to sleep around 4:30 or 4:45. When I woke up to my alarm at 6:30 this morning, I once again felt like I didn't get a single minute of sleep. The way my body felt was very reminiscent of pulling all-nighters at the gaming shop when I was in high school. I decided to check my Fitbit app to see if I just didn't get a good sleep, but it says that I was in a light sleep to awake from 3:25 until 4, and completely awake from 4 o'clock till 5:45. But I know I closed my eyes again and started drifting off well before 5. If you've made it this far, then thanks for hearing me out. If you have any thoughts about what happened to me or advice, then genuinely, I would love to hear it. I need to figure out what happened last night and in my past, and if you have any advice as to how I could do this, then please do let me know. Me and my friend, both girls, both 13 at the time, took an evening stroll at a really dodgy part of town. Really idiotic, I know, but this was pre-2015. It was January and it was pretty dark outside. No people were around, except for 2 blocks down where there was a bus stop and a 7-Eleven. As we pass a newly built apartment complex, we start heading towards the bus stop. Before I understood what happened, someone trips over my leg, falls face down on the pavement, scratching himself, and drops something that rattles, metallic-y on the asphalt. We both find ourselves staring at an adult male who starts screaming bloody murder, grasping the thing that fell out of his hand as he gets up and starts charging at us, telling us to get over here. We immediately start running towards the apartment complex. The door was unlocked, thank God, and we rush up the stairs and encounter a couple who were on their way out. We explained the situation to them, holding back tears. The man thankfully didn't follow us inside. The couple tried to calm us down and followed us outside, and no man was there to be seen. He had just vanished. The couple, they seemed to be in a hurry and decided to just leave us to get back home on our own. As we go towards the bus stop, really shaken up, we see the same man enter the bus that's just about to leave. He looks really calm now and put together, at least from the glance that I got. His bus leaves and we get home sometime later, not telling our parents about the situation since we were scared that they get mad that we decided to walk into that area of town and never let us walk again or something. It's been more than 10 years since then, and we both discuss this pretty often as we really had no idea what actually happened. The man honestly just seemingly appeared out of nowhere as we didn't hear him approach until he was about a few meters away, and there were no people around us to drown out the noise of him approaching. We don't know exactly what he was holding in his hand that he dropped. All we heard was the weird rattling sound and saw something silver looking. We questioned if it was a folding knife, but the memory is so foggy by now and we honestly didn't get a good look at it. I also don't know how I managed to trip him up either, and why he seemingly stopped chasing us after a few steps. At first we thought that I just accidentally made him fall as he started running toward the bus stop, but he came up behind me and the angle that he came from left several meters free from either side of me that he easily could have used if he had to bolt to the bus or whatever. I guess we both just decided to leave it at that as just an accident, but I don't know. I still feel uncomfortable when I pass that particular part of town, and I'm not so sure that that guy didn't trip over us on purpose or something. Again, it's a bit of a foggy memory, and like I said, we don't have all the details, but the way he chased us and the aggression that he used in his voice, I will never forget that. I've never really had any kind of paranormal experience before this, but generally I've always believed that there was more to this life. So, the other week I was sat on my friend's sofa facing his living room door whilst he had his back to it, when I, out of nowhere, saw a long pair of greyish fingers creep around the door, and a woman that I can only describe as the woman from Shutter Island. Literally Google Shutter Island woman and it should show you exactly what I saw. Poked her head around briefly, scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and suddenly turned and disappeared from my line of sight. The weirdest thing is that another friend walked through that door almost instantly after she disappeared and swears blind that there was no one there. I was so sure though that somebody was in the house that we looked in every room twice. I've tripped before years ago, so I know what that feels like, and even then you don't see entities with vivid clarity that I saw her with. The strangest thing is that two of my friends have seen an entity poking its head around doors in different locations, and I spoke to them both separately while holding back most of the story, and both of them filled in the gaps, ensuring me that they're telling the truth. So my question for all of you guys is, should I be worried about this, and how should I deal with her if she returns? August this past year, my family stayed at an Airbnb in Purcellville, VA, 10 minutes outside of Harper's Ferry. Look up the John Brown raid, and about 45 minutes away from Gettysburg. The house itself is older than the town, built in 1752 and on a current working farm vineyard. But here's the setup of the house. So, you enter into the oldest part of the home. You can see these two sections, kitchen and sitting room, where the original cabin before past owners built on. Through the sitting room was a small library, another sitting area, and my parents' room on the first floor but off the ground outside. When you go up the stairs of the sitting room, there's a bathroom to the right, 2 doors in front of the stairs, and a room to the left over the kitchen. My husband and I stayed in this room over the kitchen as the bedroom directly in front of the stairs gave me the creeps. It had the original fireplace in there, but something when I walked in just felt off. My sister and brother-in-law stayed on the floor above us, as that room has its own window and AC unit. The house has no communal AC, just individual in-room units. We arrived on a Sunday. So Monday morning, my dad asked me about footsteps from the night prior. He said that he was sitting at the kitchen table on his computer and could hear footsteps walking around the house above him. My dad had also been making jokes and tends to be a little theatrical with his humor, leading up to a vacation, calling it Ghost Central, so I told him that our room is above the kitchen and I wouldn't think anything of it. It was probably just one of us getting ready for bed or whatever. He then mentioned that he thought that he saw a bright light shining outside of his window and was tempted to look but thought better of it. Again though, my dad has also had a history of wild dreams and sleepwalking, so I just sort of brushed it off. Randomly too, my husband asked me to help him move the crib from the other side of our room to be next to our bed. I didn't think anything of it, as he said that it was just to be easier because our room was so big. It was half the full length of the original cabin with only our bed at the far end of the room, opposite from the crib and a bathroom. Anyway, on Tuesday, my dad's birthday, we sat in the old dining room for dinner. The room is a stunning, picturesque old farmhouse dining room with a big window overlooking the field, shed and barn, with the mountains around us too. It was still light outside, about 5 p.m. while we were eating, and I looked outside of the window and noticed the shed door seeming slightly ajar. I didn't think too much of it, but the next time I looked up, it looked more open, but slightly enough that I thought that I was just overthinking it. This then happened several more times. The door was more open, more closed, etc. I didn't want to scare my already anxious dad, so I texted my husband, "Can you go out and check the shed? The door keeps opening, I think." He checks his phone, and when we both look up, we watch the shed door slowly open itself completely, and then just as slowly closed itself shut again. My husband went outside with my dad to check it out, but in the end, nobody was there. We locked the shed and said that it shouldn't open again, but it was weird that the door would both open and close itself like that, right? Anyway, Wednesday we were gone for the day in DC, but on Thursday we went to Gettysburg for the day, and my husband left after dinner to put the baby to bed so I could do the ghost tour with my family. When we got home, my husband, who is naturally very skeptical of ghosts and hyperlogical about everything, said that he heard footsteps upstairs when he got in. Now, my dad and sister had met the groundskeeper on a walk along the property earlier in the week, and my husband said that he was worried the guy was a weirdo walking around the house and maybe snooping while we were gone. Another thing about the house too is that the sound doesn't travel at all. What I mean is that sitting in the kitchen, you didn't get an echo, or had to speak very loud and clear to someone in the next room. No acoustics, in other words. So he checked every room and closet to make sure that nobody was in the house. That's how loud the steps were, and he was a little spooked, but we decided not to say anything because my family was making comments all week about the house and we didn't want to upset anyone. That night, I thought that I was starting to get paranoid because I could have sworn that I was hearing a knocking above my head, and also thought that I was smelling vanilla. On the ghost tour, we learned that the townspeople dealt with the smell of corpses for months post-war by dipping face masks in vanilla, lavender, and mint. I thought that I was just spooked and I did my best to sleep, but when I woke up the next morning, always the first because I have my routine with our daughter, I noticed that the kitchen cabinets were left open. I was confused, but just closed them, and while my daughter was taking a nap later that morning, I tapped her monitor and the camera rotated all the way down. That really confused me. Had I held it down, or am I just overthinking it? My family decided to spend the day in Leesburg as our last full day before we left Saturday. At lunch, I mentioned the cabinets, and my dad said that it might have been him. He got my mum a glass of water before bed, apparently, but we all went to bed after him, so that didn't make any sense. Then, my sister mentioned that she woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. She said that she was having a really weird dream and thought that she heard someone whisper in her ear, "Don't move." She said that before bed, her and her husband were watching more videos about Gettysburg and saw a bright flash of light outside the window, so bright that she even checked the weather thinking that maybe there was a lightning storm on the way or something. Then I looked at my husband and said, "Did you tell them about the footsteps?" He hadn't. He shared his story and then said that he also woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat this morning. My sister also mentioned that she also hated the first bedroom. There was something about the fireplace that really creeped her out the same way it gave me the weird vibes. So in the end, we all decided to keep the door shut all week without saying anything to each other about it. We were all stunned, but my sister immediately started panicking, asking if we could leave. We were all on the fence about it. I mean, we were planning to leave Saturday at 6 a.m. regardless, to get home and to return to our rentals, but we weren't entirely convinced. We finished our day out, came home and began to pack up what we needed to, and then we went to dinner with the plan to stay one more night. And this is where everything got really weird. So when we got home from dinner, the bedroom door that we kept shut was actually cracked open, and then air was coming out of it that was so cold it was like standing directly in front of the AC. It was just my husband and I on the stairs, and we looked at each other, and he quickly shut it before my sister came up because, well, we didn't want her to freak out even more. We put the baby to bed, and I headed downstairs because we all talked about having one last fire pit outside. My husband stayed with the baby until she fell asleep, but when I came downstairs, my family was all huddled together saying, "We need to go." My sister was really scared and didn't want to stay another night in their room. After some discussion, we all decided that it'd be best to leave at this point. We were only like 3 hours from home and we could sleep in our own beds before midnight. We got the cars loaded up relatively quickly and I had our daughter in her car seat and was talking with my sister, with the car door open as the boys all did a final walk through the house. From the outside, you can see perfectly who is where in the house too. I could see my dad walking into what was our room on the second floor with my husband, and I could see the flashlights scanning the top floor simultaneously where my sister and brother-in-law slept. My husband had his flashlight on when he went into the house, so I assumed that it was him up there. After a few minutes, my dad throws out some final trash, and I see him sort of half running or scuffling to the car, and he says, "Okay, time to go." We start heading down the driveway and turn to my husband and asked why he didn't just turn the lights on upstairs when he checked it. And he said that he wasn't up there, that it was my brother-in-law. My dad yelled up the stairs asking if brother-in-law was up there, and husband heard, "Yeah, I'm up here." At that point, my sister calls me. I ask her if brother-in-law was upstairs to do a final sweep, and he said no. He didn't go upstairs at all, and my dad, in their car, confirmed it. My dad said that he yelled up the stairs if he was there, and my brother-in-law apparently yelled from the first floor though, "No, I'm in the kitchen." When everyone asked why, I told them what I saw, and it was like someone was walking around the third floor with a flashlight scanning the room. My dad mentioned that when he went into my room to check it, his flashlight started to die at that point, and when he stepped into the hallway, it came back on. My husband agreed and shared when he went into our room with my dad that he felt sort of suddenly numb as well. And while my dad was locking the house up on the keypad, he started the 4-digit code, and the house locked itself on the second number. And when he went to throw out the last of the trash, his flashlight started to die again, and that's when we all saw him shuffling to the car. Oh, and when we tried to find any information on this house, it's so old and historical that there's got to be something, right? But we found nothing, except the 2020 Zillow listing from the last owner, who literally had 6 packed paragraphs of information about the house, and under what the owner loves about the house is one sentence. The house was a Civil War field hospital, and then goes on to talk about the home's 66 acres and nearby locations. Needless to say, after all of that, we all felt better about coming home and not spending another night there. Sometimes I wonder if ghosts just get comfortable or familiar, and as more weird stuff happened leading up to the night that we left, I would not have been able to sleep that night. The owner texted my dad the next day to give checkout instructions, and my dad said that we left last night. "I'm sure we're not the first to tell you this, but your place is haunted." The owners were surprised and said that we actually were the first to say so, and asked what we experienced, and that it was a Civil War field hospital per Zillow. They simply said, "Well, it definitely has its history," and asked us to leave a review. In the end, we didn't. I, a 21-year-old female, lived with my grandparents for most of my life, up until last year, that is. I've never been as in tune to the supernatural as my brother was. I've seen very few things, and after what I've seen, I think that I'd like to keep it that way, to be honest. The first time I recall seeing this thing was when I was about 18. I was talking with my ex-boyfriend in his car after an argument, and I just so happened to look out towards my grandma's van, and that was when I saw it. It looked like my ex, but faceless, and it was wearing something completely different than what he was. I knew it wasn't a reflection. It was even facing a different way. I didn't say anything to him. I don't know why. I just tried to ignore it, and eventually it just seemed to go away when I looked away. I eventually forgot about this incident, and I just went on with life. A few years ago, though, I started smoking outside with my brother at night, because I found out that the only thing that actually puts me to sleep is smoking. Sometimes I'd have to go out alone, and I started seeing this thing again at some point. Honestly, I thought that I was hallucinating at first, but I never saw it anywhere but outside of my house. It looked like my mum once, and when it looked like my brother, it was especially horrifying. It was the realest I'd ever felt, and it just sort of stared at me. It even bent over to look at me from behind the van like my brother would have, because he's so tall. It looked like me once, but it took the form of my dressed up all pretty, and it felt like it was, I don't know, like mocking me almost. And it got harder to ignore it every time. I could feel it. I could feel it looking at me. It never spoke to me or anything. The face would just morph and twist sometimes. I don't think it wanted to hurt me because it never came close or moved. But I stopped going outside alone after that, and I've started staying with my current boyfriend, and I haven't seen it since. My brother has been seeing it longer than I have. He said that on multiple occasions, it had actually chased him back into the house as a fully black shadow figure. He saw it on our laundry room today looking like our mum again, and says that he hears our grandma call his name through the house when she isn't home. So my question is, do you think that we're dealing with a mimic? I've heard about these before from reading other stories elsewhere, but I don't know. I guess I just don't want to believe it, but everything seems to point in that direction, so yeah. This happened around 2018, right after my sister and I moved out of our apartment together. It's been bothering me since I just moved out. I was home alone on my day off when someone knocked on my door. No one ever visits, and I have anxiety, so that was terrifying to my brain already. But I answered, and it was a woman who lived in one of the basement apartments. She seemed nice at first, asking if I wanted my clothes that she was giving away because they weren't her style but supposedly matched mine perfectly as a young woman. That was already a bit of a red flag in my mind, because the only time that I ever saw her was when I was walking to work, wearing my uniform of a black shirt, black pants, and black hat. But I let her talk because, well, I'm super awkward and hated being rude to technical strangers. Then she started getting pushy and listing off super expensive name brands to try to get me to go to her apartment. It's an old small building, no cameras, and I lived on the second and top floor, which would be down what I called the creepy stairs and next to the door to the back lot that nobody used. When I realized that she was holding a notebook open with a script of what to say, I continued to reject, but my anxiety wouldn't let me close the door on her face without fear of her lashing out. She kept insisting until I finally told her that my boyfriend was going to be home soon and suggested that she donated them. My boyfriend wasn't going to be home for many, many hours, but she didn't need to know that, obviously. She leaves and I go back to my room, which has a window facing that back lot or alley. A few moments later, I hear a fight happening in the lot and see her with the previous, he was already fired at that point, maintenance man. It's a loud, screaming fight, and they're standing next to his truck, which has tinted windows and a covered truck bed. My paranoia went a little wild, so I texted my family about it, just to feel a bit safer. Then I believe that he left, but a little while later, something hits my door hard. I didn't check, just sort of stared. Then it happened again and again, all night until my boyfriend came home, and for a few days when I was alone. I found out after looking at the door that they were hitting my deadbolt, and it was off-center. Even after it was replaced, the damage just couldn't be fixed. It stopped after a little while, and the woman moved out almost immediately after all of that. I don't want to feed my paranoia, but something obviously just wasn't right. I know that I should have called the police, but I have horrific phone anxiety. Everyone thought that I was overreacting too, and police in my town are relatively useless anyway. Also, that maintenance man was rehired and was the one who replaced my deadbolt, insisting that he kept the extra key, despite never needing the old. Thankfully, my new house is much safer. So my girlfriend and I, we were visiting the Arches and Canyonlands area for the weekend, and ended up heading out pretty late from Moab to get into Canyonlands, about 45-minute to a 1-hour drive. A few years previous, I'd gone there myself and stayed until the moon rose, because that meant people were leaving, and as a field recordist, that meant a quiet environment to record in. That night in 2020, the moon was bright and there were a few night photographers there that I ended up hanging out with, and it was generally a surreal experience and I felt completely safe. Hoping to have a similar time again with girlfriend along for the ride, and forgetting the fact that maybe the clouds would largely block moonlight that night, I drove us up. It was pretty dark before we even made it 15 minutes along the drive there. Having been there, more specifically Mesa Ark, twice before, and this being a borderline spiritual place for me, I didn't even think about danger or anything of the sort. Despite that, I had a sixth sense of a gut feeling pretty early on that we really just shouldn't head up there that night. But not wanting to freak myself out, or my girlfriend, I didn't say anything or think much of it, and chalked it up to just being nervous because it was dark. Now, there was a certain vibe along the roads leading up there, and we noticed that there were people leaving the park, but no one coming in ahead of or behind us. The instinct to not continue hit me subtly a few more times, and I kept pushing it away like an idiot, I guess, but I've been very familiar with these instincts over the past years, and they've served me well, as far as I can tell anyway. I think I genuinely thought that I was just scared because it was dark at this point. But we ended up at the Mesa Park parking lot where two cars were packing up and heading out. When they left, it was almost completely dark with the only faintest glow of the moon through the clouds, and not a person around anywhere near us. Canyonlands is pretty remote. We got our backpacks on though, grab a couple of things, and my girlfriend makes sure that I've got my CCW. She doesn't usually care much, so this struck me as an indication that she was maybe concerned too. In any case, we started heading up. It's a pretty short trail, maybe a quarter of a mile. All we wanted to do really was get to this little bowl-like area, the main destination, and hang out and record some sounds. The area is pretty open, with trees both live and dead scattered around, bushes and small cacti and rocky slopes that can be climbed in a few seconds if you really want to. It's a pretty dope scene in the daytime, and I've never really felt uneasy here previously. We'd been doing a bit of travel vlog so far, so I just continued doing that. But I genuinely get goosebumps and chills every single time that I think about this part. It was the weirdest feeling that I'd ever felt. I felt, I don't know, like instinctual, I should get out of here, I'm being watched, etc. I've had those type of feelings before and have several stories to tell from those, but I've never felt what I felt while vlogging like this. This might not seem relevant too, but for context, the field recording that I do is largely of gathering wood and rock sounds. Canyonlands has Navajo sandstone and juniper wood, both of which sound wonderful when tumbled and rolled around. I think of field recording as an art, yes, but also as a way to appreciate a land in a closer way, at least for me, than just taking pictures of it. Personally, I feel like I'm capturing the essence of a location in a very respectful way. Anyway, as I'm vlogging, I felt something that I can only describe as a need to show that I was there peacefully and with respectful intent. I didn't hear anything or see anything that would indicate that I needed to show that I was here on peaceful business, but I just felt it so strongly. Again, I didn't want to scare off my girlfriend, so I didn't say this. I figured that I was just feeling on edge being in near complete darkness again. We could barely see our own feet on the easy open trail at this point. We kept our lamps off to let our eyes adjust to the glow, but I turned mine on to read a plaque at one point. My girlfriend mentioned that I should probably turn it off so I don't create shadows and freak us out, so I turned it back off quickly. I also felt like I was spotlighting myself by having it on anyway, and I was about to turn it back off anyway before she said that. We continued, and the uneasiness just grew and grew. This lasted until we both reached the same exact spot on the trail and stopped at the same time, in silence. "I think we should head back," my girlfriend said, and I agreed. Never have I felt a stronger feeling of being unwelcome in a place. It felt like we just hit a barrier. Not only did I feel unwelcome, but it was more particularly the feeling of intruding on a congregation or a meeting or a gathering that we were not invited to. I don't know how to describe this feeling at all, besides that it was not a conscious thought. It was just there, as these kinds of instincts tend to be. At this point, I realized that I'd been ignoring these feelings long enough, and it was most certainly time to go. I have no idea what was going on in that little bowl that we were about to reach, but I didn't want to find out. We made our way quickly back to the car, and as soon as we got back, we hear a large pack of coyotes quite nearby, but in the opposite direction that we'd been heading on the trail. If we would have continued on that trail, it was not coyotes that we would have run into. But still, this felt like an additional cue to leave, and my girlfriend said, "That's our cue." I badly wanted to record their yips, but common sense took over and we just got the heck out of there. The road, completely devoid of any sign of other people now, was particularly eerie. Driving back wasn't just trying to get back to our campsite in Moab. It almost felt like we were escaping, like when you turn off the lights and you run up the stairs kind of vibe. Now relatively safe in our car, we discussed what had just happened. And every single unspoken, strong gut feeling that I had had, my girlfriend had felt too. The exact same things at the same times. Both felt the need to show something or someone that we meant no harm by vlogging and being chill outwardly. Both felt multiple times on the drive there and on the trail that we shouldn't go. Both felt at the same times that we were like actors on a stage being watched by a multitude of something. Both felt unwelcome, like we were crashing a party. Both felt like we needed to go at the same exact point on the trail. And none of these were spoken aloud to each other at any point until we were back on the road and getting the heck out of there. But as we drove, the moon became visible for a bit. I'm not familiar with moon stuff, but it had been a full moon a few days before, and that night it was large, not full though, and red. This was because of the red sand in the air from the windy day that we'd had, I think, but my girlfriend said that also meant bad juju apparently. Looking into the history of the region and even stories of strange happenings at this place, I am sure that we avoided something strange and or dangerous that night. So I'm a 22-year-old female, and for some context, I live in the countryside of France. My village is settled at the top of a hill and surrounded by forests and crops with no stores or bakery or anything. My parents' house is near two farms, and behind the garden there are large crops there. So, the bathroom's windows overlook the garden, and before my parents built a veranda, there were curtains, so every time that I closed it was when I was going to the bathroom, which made my family laugh. "Why are you closing it? No one is watching you." I was like, "We don't know that, it's just in case." Then the veranda was built, and my dad got rid of the curtains and he put strips on the window. I got worried because I love to know that I have my own privacy when going to the bathroom, like anyone, right? And I even showed my parents that when we are standing at the end of the garden that you can see other people in the bathroom. Of course they laughed and said, "You're just being paranoid," but weeks passed and then I noticed a tractor that was parked just at the end of the garden. Every night the tractor was here. My parents also noticed it and thought that it was a bit weird. We've lived there for like 20 years and it's never really happened before. Sometimes we felt like we were being watched, but we shrugged it off, thinking that we were just being paranoid. My dad came to talk to the farmer to get rid of the tractor, and then it disappeared for a while. Today, though, I was smoking outside, and my mum came to me and told me, "I think you're right, we are being watched." Yesterday night, I was going to the bathroom, and the tractor was parked in front of the garden with its headlights illuminating the bathroom's window. I turned the light off and went to the veranda and took a picture, and then he left. I am glad that I was right, but I'm also worried because I don't know how long he or she has been stalking us in the bathroom like that. What are their intentions with just sitting there? Why do they come there like every single night? What are your thoughts about it, and what do you think we should do? I'm a Chinese woman, but I grew up in Sydney, Australia. However, I was born in Beijing, but on the outskirts of it in a large town called Yungang Residential District, where my mum's family is from. When I was 5, I immigrated to Australia, but my family would still travel back to China every few years. This incident happened in the snowy winter of 1997, when I was about 11 years old. So my parents still lived in Yungang and introduced me to a brother and sister who lived in the same building as them. I can't remember their exact ages, but I think the older girl was around 14 and the younger boy was around 6. I still remember the exact outfit I was wearing, as I'd been wearing the same outfit all trip. At that time, flared jeans were in, and coming from Australia, I wasn't prepared for the snow and coldness of the Chinese winter. And so on my first or second day there, my Chinese cousin had taken me to a shopping mall where she'd helped me haggle down the price of a bright pink duffel coat with fluffy white trimming. I thought that it was the most fashionable thing ever, and I wore it pretty much every day. I have photos of me from that trip wearing that exact outfit, in fact. Anyway, we walked around town and ended up going to this very large park with a lake inside it. It was a little bit of a distance from the center of town, but we were playing by the shore, throwing rocks, joking around, and just having a good time. At some point, I looked up and realized that it was getting close to dusk. Although it probably wasn't very late, but considering that it was winter and the sun set early, that might explain it. The park, which had been very busy to start with, was nearly deserted at this point. There were still some other people, but they were a fair distance away from us at this point. All except for 2 men who suddenly approached us. They were middle to late middle-aged, the uncle type, I guess. One of them approached me and said that he was a friend of my father's, and that he'd been asked to pick us up. I remember being confused because my dad didn't live in this town and was in another district, about 2 hours away in Beijing, where his family were from. Pretty quickly I realized that something was off, and so did the brother and sister that I was with. We all started making excuses and sort of backing off. I still remember very clearly that as we started backing away, the man who approached us looked back over his shoulder at his companion, as if asking him what should we do. And it was then that I noticed that his companion was standing a little distance away beside a white van with the door already slid open. To this day, I believe, too, that he was considering snatching one of us and making a run for it. However, perhaps because there were 3 of us, and also perhaps because there were still people around in the peripheries, they didn't do anything. As I walked away rapidly, I looked back over my shoulder and remember seeing the 2 men just sort of standing there watching us go. That 15 to 20 minute walk back was one of the scariest walks in my life, as I imagined someone grabbing me from behind every second. The sun had just set as we got into my building and burst in through the door, so happy to be home and safe. I did tell my mum and grandmother about it, but at the time, child kidnappings in China, while already definitely happening, were much less of a massive and widespread news story as it is now. I think my mum especially felt that my being almost kidnapped was somehow a commentary on her parenting skills or whatever, and was very dismissive, and even now dislikes it when I bring it up. Now that organized child and or bride kidnappings are such a huge story in China, it often makes me shiver at night to think just how different my fate could have been. There have been so many stories about young women or girls kidnapped and forced into becoming brides of villages and remote countrysides, sometimes tied to beds and having their legs broken to prevent them from running away. No one in the village will help them because almost all the men in the village have purchased brides from traffickers in this way. There's also children, usually boys, kidnapped into families who have been unable to have kids or adopt legally. They fare a bit better, but can also be abused and neglected. Now that I have my own kids and I'm safe and warm in my bed in Sydney, I sometimes think about how wildly and irrevocably my life might have derailed that snowy evening in Yungang, and honestly, I shiver. I've been living in my house now for a little over 3 months. From the day that me and my husband moved in, I would always see a black shadow out of the corner of my eye. I was 7 months pregnant when we moved in, and I was super eager to set up the nursery. Well, as soon as the crib and everything was in the nursery, I would always see the black figure entering the nursery. I always thought to myself that black shadows are mostly never a good entity, right? So I just tried to ignore it, and always acted like I didn't see anything. My husband is also not the type of person who believes in the paranormal, so I just always kept things to myself. And things didn't get bad until I gave birth to my son. Now, whatever it is, it mimics his cries, and my husband, who never believed in the first place, is also starting to hear it too. We both just ignore it, but we always share a bit of a look, I guess. But tonight was the first time where I just couldn't ignore it. I've been struggling with postpartum depression, and I decided to just take a bit of a nice relaxing shower while my husband and son were both asleep. However, the whole time that I was in the shower, I felt like eyes were on me. When I got out, I felt better and decided to wash some bottles. And as I'm washing some bottles, I felt something behind me touch my back. I just assumed it was my husband, but then I saw something black on the ground crawling towards me. I immediately jumped back, and when I did, I blinked and it was gone. I ran into our bedroom and woke my husband up, freaking out. He told me that it was probably just from my lack of sleep and to go to bed. But I know what I saw, and now I'm definitely not sleeping tonight. I've always been super creeped out by this experience, and I've thought a long time about sharing it, but it really wasn't until I told one of my friends this story that they pointed out that this might be a Men in Black type of story. Anyways, here it goes. So, it was my middle brother's 10th birthday party, so this was 2006, and I pretty much grew up in the woods as my backyard was a creek park, which is also where Blair Witch supposedly took place, but I digress. My brother's birthday party was a pirate-themed one, and I guess my mum had given us chocolate coins for treasure, I think. I don't really remember why, but all the boys at the party, myself and my mum, walked through the woods before having cake. My youngest brother, Jesse, 6 at the time, told me when we got back to the house that he left his coins by the bridge in the woods. At that part of the woods, there was a fork that was in the path. Left was the bridge leading to a walking trail, and right was deeper on the path ahead, near the creek. So I decided that I would go and find his coins and told him to come with me. Oddly enough, my mum warned us not to go, but we still did, and she let us for whatever reason. Again, this was a long time ago, so I don't remember all of the details. The bridge was about a 5-minute walk from the bottom of our hill that was our backyard. We walked into the woods and everything was normal, just like it was moments ago when we were there with the group. We finally made it to the bridge and I found Jesse's coins right away. I was bent down and Jesse was behind me, and I look up while grabbing the coin, and all of a sudden there's a man in all white with a white brim hat just standing there. At first, I thought it was a cowboy hat, and then a man behind him wearing all white too, but had no hat, was standing there as well. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, and I started backing up right away when I saw the first man because, for whatever reason, I just felt pure fear. He saw me scared and backing off, and he said, "I don't bite." That's when I told Jesse to run. And I was screaming run, and we just ran home. I didn't even check to see if they were following us, but we ran all the way out of the woods and up the hill screaming because the group, plus my mum, were on the back deck, and I knew if the men knew people were listening for us, maybe they wouldn't chase us. We told the boys and my mum what happened, and my mum said, "See, I told you so," and that was it. It was absolutely terrifying though, and they truly just came out of nowhere, like they just materialized in front of us. My brother remembers this as vividly as I do, and we just remember both of them looked really strange. Like they were completely white, like paper white. I'm wondering too if anyone has encountered men in all white in the woods like this. I never really knew what this all meant, but it was just so creepy and weird, and this is probably the best place to share something like this, so I thought that I would tell my story here. If you have any idea as to what any of this means, then please do let me know, as all these years later and I still can't stop thinking about it. Two days ago, I was with my friends, their names are Callie and Xander, and we were at my grandparents' house while they were out of town because I'm the caretaker for the house when they're gone, and my friend wanted to hang out for a little bit, so after I finished all my chores, I decided that I wanted to take them out to my old hideout in the woods. I do remember telling them that the woods were actually off limits and that if my uncle caught us, that I'd be in big trouble. Xander was a little bit more hesitant, but ended up going with me and Callie. I just want to clarify too that they both agreed to go and I didn't force them. Anyway, like a group of stupid teens in a horror movie, we all walk to the woods looking to just have some fun and mess around a bit. I get to the opening in the woods and I tell them that it's going to be a very big climb. Callie pulls out her phone and starts recording. Xander sounds a little scared and says that he's not good with climbing, but Callie ends up convincing him to go anyway. After Xander agrees, Callie screams "bring it on" in a sort of joking way before entering the woods with Xander and I. Now, we get about halfway to the hideout when Xander stops and says that he has a bad feeling. I tell him that it's probably nothing and that we should just continue walking. A few minutes later, and we're at my old hideout, and Callie started being all loud and obnoxious. I reminded her to be quiet because of my uncle. At some point, though, Xander asks if we can leave now because his back was starting to hurt, so we got up and started walking back. We got out of the woods and started walking back to the house when Xander and Callie started freaking out, saying that they really didn't have a good feeling. I told them that I didn't feel anything, but right as I did, I got a very scary image in my head. It was this thing, and it was about 6'5", black muscular figure with horns crawling on all fours. I tell them this, and Callie ends up saying that she needs to sit down because it felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. And then all of a sudden, she just collapsed onto the ground. I look at Xander, and I ask him to help me help her up. She was still awake, but sort of really out of it. We start walking with her, and we only get a few steps when she regains complete consciousness, I guess you could say. She looks at us and says, "I'm scared." Right after she says that, we all hear a little kid screaming bloody murder, and without thinking, we all just sprint straight back to the house. We get back to the house, and Xander and I are freaking out, but Callie is oddly calm. We ask her what's wrong, and she won't answer. 5 minutes into trying to see if she's okay, she starts mumbling in what seems like a language that isn't English. And for as long as I've known Callie, I know that the only language that she knows is English. She keeps mumbling though, and then starts laughing too. I tell Xander to get Callie to the car while I run inside to the house to lock all the doors. I get the house all locked down, and then I run back to my car. Xander is holding Callie at this point, and I'm trying to find my key. I find it in my pocket eventually, and I unlock the car for Xander to get Callie into it. I hop in as well and crank it while Xander is getting her buckled in and everything. Xander gets in the car, and I rush out of there heading to my dad's house to get my sage and stuff because at this point, Xander and I have a feeling that she's not Callie anymore, if you know what I mean. I'm speeding through some back roads to get to my dad's house because I realize the longer that we're in the car, the worse Callie was getting. She was now unresponsive and not reacting to anything that we said to her. We get her to my dad's though, and I run inside and get the sage. I told Xander to take her outside though to the backyard so my neighbors wouldn't see us. Xander sits her down, and I light the sage, and I'm smudging the sage and saying something along the lines of, "This is her body, not yours. You need to leave. I don't welcome you here anymore. You're not allowed to haunt her, my friends, the house, or me. And about 20 minutes later, Callie seems to come back to us. We asked her what happened, and she said that she didn't remember anything and that she just felt trapped and then she just blacked out. 6 or 7 minutes later, my dad called me and told me that he had just left for work and that he was going to pick up some food. I told him that I had friends over and he offered to get them some food too. At this point, we'd all calmed down, but we tell him what we want, we eat and laugh like nothing happened. But unfortunately, it didn't end here. The next day, my friend Xander didn't come to school. I texted him asking if he was okay, and this is what he said to me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Something happened last night, and it made me stay up until 3 a.m., so my mum let me stay home." And then hours later, he followed up with, "I think a spirit attached to me, like an evil one." And Callie texted me saying something felt very wrong at her house too. She sent me a video as well, and it was her walking into her room and the blinds were moving. Stuff was knocked off the shelves and she was just freaking out because none of her family were home. She was alone hours after we got out of school that day too. And to be honest, I don't like the feeling that I get sleeping at my dad's place anymore. Not to mention that I also have guinea pigs and they've been acting really weird since this happened, like they're more aggressive towards me and each other as well. I really don't know what to make of any of this and I need some help understanding it. Before I met my now boyfriend, it was just my daughter and I. At that time, we lived on our own in an apartment complex. She wasn't even 2 years old yet. I have plenty of stories about this complex, but there's one that I'd like to focus on right now. So my daughter came into the imaginary friend stage. At first, it was cute, I thought. I would walk into her bedroom and she would be playing with her dolls, talking to herself, her friend, and keeping herself busy while I just did my best to keep the apartment clean and make some food. Slowly over time, though, my daughter got freaked out by her bedroom. So much so that she would not step foot into her room, even for her toys. There was a week period that we didn't enter her room, in fact. She still had toys in the living room to play with, slept in my room, and I had done laundry previously and she wore those clothes instead. In the end, we had to call her father over to ease her fears. My own dad even came over a handful of times too to help out. But this started the check under the bed for monsters and in the closet too theme. After a while, she started to sleep in her room again. She could no longer sleep with her door closed though, light off or without noise. I put a small TV in her room for her to watch her Barbie movies at night to help her sleep. Still though, she would end up in my room in the middle of the night. She had nightmares often too when she didn't like to sleep. One day I'm sitting and writing out a grocery list to go shopping, and I could hear a little girl giggling, but our window was open, so I dismissed it. My daughter then came up to me asking if I wanted her purple Hugs barrel, juice. I said no thank you, sweetie. She asked why not, and I said that purple just isn't the color that I like, it's all yours. She asked what color I did like, and I said that I liked the blue one. She went over to the pantry to get a juice and she started talking. I was sort of half listening when she loudly said, "My mum likes blue, not bleach," and came out shaking her head looking really angry. I asked her what she said and her face sort of fell. She shrugged her shoulders and said, "I don't know," and then just ran off to play. I went into my pantry, half knowing what I would see, but on the top shelf in the back where my daughter couldn't see was a gallon of bleach that I was going to use to make a tie-dye shirt. I bought it over a month ago and I have no idea how she knew that it was up there. For some context, when the house was sold to my boyfriend, they couldn't technically label this room as a bedroom. It has to have a closet and some other qualifications apparently, but the elderly woman who lived there made it her bedroom. This room was a sort of dirty beige tan color and concrete flooring. Her clothes and knickknacks sat on what looked like built-in wooden shelves. There were 3 perfectly usable rooms upstairs that she could have used, not to mention the laundry is also upstairs, so why she put her bedroom in the basement in a room I would consider a storage room, I have no idea. There's no ceiling in this room too, and the only window is this tiny little rectangle window, maybe 2.5 to 3 feet wide and a foot tall. But in any case, the woman passed, I believe, inside this house. Right before my boyfriend bought it, the son of the lady who passed suddenly died too. I don't know how, but it was just eerie at the time, I think. Anyway, as we were moving my stuff in, we needed a large tote kept in that room downstairs, so I ran down to get it. My son wasn't born yet at this stage, and my daughter was at school, so it was only my boyfriend and myself. He's upstairs organizing something. I enter the room and it's pitch black. We had changed the light bulb before, and no light bulbs lasted long in this room. I left my phone upstairs and needed light, so I crossed the room knowing the window was at the very back. It was a creepy pitch black room, and I went straight into the back. The dark has always creeped me out, so I opened the curtain and there was a sort of foam board covering this window, and as soon as I noticed this, the door slammed shut. I was startled and I let out a scream. There were random items in the room that we stuck in there to get them out of the way, like the old front door welcome mat, a workout machine I think, and totes and random odds and ends. So I made my way to the door around these objects as quickly as I could, because the dark freaked me out, and that room gave me the jeebies anyways. I found the doorknob and the door felt like it was being held shut. I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried, and I kept trying over and over again. Panic was setting in and I started screaming to let me out. I thought my boyfriend was playing a mean prank on me, which wasn't like him, and I believed that until I heard his footsteps frantically storming down the stairs. He was telling me to let go of the doorknob, which I did. He told me to stand back, so I stood in the middle of the room as he kicked and kicked at the door, but it just wasn't budging. I was crying now, and he could hear that it was not a normal quiet sob. I mean, I was in full panic mode at this point. He got the door broken down eventually because the frame to the door broke. I ran out and he caught me, asking what the heck just happened. I explained everything to him. We went upstairs immediately and I told him that I never wanted to step foot in that room ever again. We believe that the lady may have passed down there. I didn't get many details of her passing myself, so what I know is what I've just been told from others. This same room has also given others the creeps with no context given beforehand. I brought both of my older sisters down to see the basement. We had redone the floors and painted the walls at this point, and they both gravitated towards the room, and they even witnessed the door closing on its own too. Both have different levels of beliefs in the paranormal. My oldest sister is a hopeful skeptic. I believe she thinks it's super interesting, but actually believing is another thing in and of itself. And my other sister is more of a believer. We play a game called Murder in the Dark. Imagine Among Us without lights. We had about 6 friends over, so 8 of us all together to play, and 3 of us happened to end up in the bedroom downstairs. After a few games, we discussed where we hid, why, and who we thought that we ran into, just sort of post-game talk. And all of my friends mentioned that they honestly believed that somebody else was in the room with them when they entered that bedroom. Another thought that they felt a cat rub up against their ankles, but we had our cat upstairs at this point. My cat is actually very vocal, and for the first game, he actually found me and gave up my hiding spot as well. But that room has the center of a lot of bizarre things. And I mean, sure, the house could be settling weird and explain the door, I guess. The electrical could be bad in that room and explain the light, but I haven't ever seen the door close on its own before or after that event ever again. And ever since my boyfriend started to renovate that room for an office, the light bulbs have lasted months now instead of a couple of days. But if you stay in that basement for long enough, trust me, you begin feeling stared at from one of the corners inevitably. I really cannot explain that, and I don't know what to think of it. I would like to begin by saying that I do believe in spirits or something beyond our comprehension exists, but my knowledge about them and our present situation is extremely poor. For possible interpretations, our home is an ancestral colonial estate within South Africa, dating back to the 19th century. There is a family mausoleum on the outskirts of the property and a somewhat large burial site for the household's workers, roughly 100 meters away from the house, and family members, friends, and some visitors have all had strange experiences in the grounds. Throughout the majority of my life, I have experienced strange things in the house, scratching from within the walls, doors slamming at night, the dogs barking at random and at nothing seemingly, footsteps, just general stuff that is scary but is also easily discarded with reason. I've always soothed myself back into calm by attributing it to be the house being old. However, the past 2 months have been nothing short of a nightmare. I feel like I'm living in a real horror movie. So, what leads me to sharing this is what was set in motion by an eerie anomaly followed by an extremely unnerving discovery. Last night, in the early hours of this morning, around 1 a.m., I was kept awake by very loud scratching, footsteps, and thumping outside of my bedroom door. Initially, I had thought that this was the dog and just let it be. A few minutes later, though, I heard my door handle being turned. It was being turned repeatedly, though, like over and over again, but the door wasn't being pushed open, nor was there any movement from the door itself. Thinking that we were being home invaded, I got my handgun and started screaming, but the door handle was still being turned. My brother and parents ran to my room. No one was outside of my door, nor was anyone found inside of the house. Neither was there any breach into the home or anything, and after searching, my parents told me that it was just a nightmare, and so, in the end, I just equated it to that. But cut forward to this morning, and my brother got up to go to work, so I went back to my room. Before opening the door, I had this indescribable feeling in my gut, though, and my body just felt suddenly cold. I went in to find my sheets sprawled out on the sofa and floor, far on the other side of the bedroom. My crucifix, which is mounted on my side of the bedroom door, was crooked with one of the nails popped out of the door and the other slightly pushed out of the wood. It was nailed in though, and I mean, it cannot physically be turned like that, and the nails just would have needed tools to be pulled out, so I have no idea how that happened. A portrait of my oppa next to my bed was very unnaturally crooked too, which was odd. But I immediately felt, and I know this sounds strange and crazy, but that something very sinister is going on and that something malevolent, no idea what, was suddenly watching me. I got my brother and he was equally distressed about it, so we got our parents. My dad thought that someone was still in the house, but my brother and dad searched the house to no avail. And again, nothing was amiss with security systems, the doors, the windows, or anything. I went back into my room and saw what we all think is blood above one of the mirrors. The mirrors are those sort of sliding mirrors with closets built into the home, and the height of the blood is very high on it. It was like 3 streaks of blood going down as if it was sort of wiped there or something. I stupidly touched it and smeared it, so the lines aren't as concise anymore, but that is proof that whatever this was, it is still wet, which means that it occurred very recently. You can sort of see too that it hasn't dripped down from anything, and it looks like it had just been placed there by fingers maybe. It's extremely difficult to reach without a chair though, so I don't know why an intruder would leave that there or willingly do that. This was not here prior as well, and the blood is in a sort of strange position that has been smeared weirdly. When my dad went to take a look, I could see that he was visibly frightened, which I'd never really seen before, and he's a pretty stoic guy. He's a strong man as well, which has furthered my belief that this is something evil. My parents called the police, and they're on the drive up here at this point. They're still discussing it and being very secretive about it. However, they just cannot comprehend or figure out what happened, and who or what did this. They don't believe in ghosts, entities, or anything spiritual, but I'll definitely be pushing them into getting the house blessed by our priest immediately. Since we were little, my brother and I have always felt like someone was in our rooms when we slept. We both feel like something is there, and there's a very sort of thick, weird feeling or energy which I find hard to describe or attribute to anything, but it is somewhat similar to, I guess, dread or maybe angst is the better word. It has intensified greatly in the last few months, with both of us experiencing more physical anomalies. We've both experienced being touched, scratched, usually on my back, but I had one which drew blood across my breast as well, and I've had my hair pulled a few times. Some family members have experienced it when visiting, and my aunt especially doesn't like staying with us, because she had similar experiences in her youth as well. My dad doesn't elaborate on it and discards it as nonsense, as she is more of the spiritual type, unlike my dad. I thought a lot of the physicality felt down to scratching itches in my sleep or getting my hair caught on things, but the more my brother and I discussed it, we believe that something is amiss and is just very, very wrong. Just to note as well, no one has broken in, nor are there any ways to access the house besides 4 very thick wooden doors, which are always deadbolted at night time. I don't have any mental health issues either, and this is not dreamt or some product of a hallucination, as we have both experienced things that we've never really discussed with each other before, and suddenly we were just like, hey, that's happened to me as well. But we are desperately looking for help or advice and an explanation as to my family's current predicament, so if you've got anything to add, any advice or really any comment, please do share it because I'm pretty frightened. Ever since we moved into our new house, which is actually quite old, that my father bought, and I was in the 4th grade at this point, it started almost immediately. When I went to sleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I heard my father snoring in his room and my sister turning in her bed with metal bed frames in her room. The footsteps, though, they always stopped right outside of my doorway. Then things started happening in the daytime. I was alone with our family dog in our house a lot, and I was always scared, and so was our dog. But I heard strange banging noises in different rooms, and our dog would go crazy when he heard it. It got worse, though, and I got more scared as it got worse as well. During days, I would yell in our house that this was my home and whoever it was needed to leave. But during the night, whatever this entity was, it got closer every night. It didn't stop anymore in front of my doorway. It started to step into my room, then step in front of my bed. Then I felt it sit on my bed. The final day I was home alone again with our dog, I was shaking in the living room couch with a knife, our dog right beside me growling and staring at the hallway. Then I heard this really loud bang like a cabinet fell over or something. Our dog went absolutely crazy and I took the kitchen knife and went screaming down the hallway how I wasn't afraid, and when I got there, nothing had fallen. That night I was like glued to the wall in my bed as well. I was panicking when I heard footsteps. They got closer and closer like they always did. I was shaking and had trouble breathing, and this thing sat on my bed next to me, but then it sort of crouched over, it seemed, and I felt hot breathing on my neck. My eyes were closed and I thought that this was it, I was about to die, when suddenly it said my name, gently and sort of hushingly. I let out the biggest scream ever and jumped up and ran straight to my sister's room, hysterically crying. She woke up and asked what had happened, and I just cried and stuttered that the man said my name. She asked what man, and I screamed, the man that comes to my room every night. After that, some days later, my dad actually hit me and I moved in with my mother. I lived there for a few years and moved back to my dad at some point. My sister was living on her own now. I moved into my sister's old room. Even though I was now 14, I was too scared to sleep in my old bedroom. I slept with my door closed, but still, every night I heard the same dreadful footsteps in the hallway. A few months went by and I was at my sister's place visiting. Old stuff was brought up at one point, and my sister asked me did I remember the man that I told her when I was 10. I said that I never forgot and asked why she asked me. And she told me that on that night when I ran to her room crying and told her sobbing about the man, apparently she acted brave for me, but when I told her, her blood ran cold. She told me that every night she had heard the same footsteps for months, and apparently she just thought that it was me. When I moved to my mum's apartment, she heard every night those footsteps as well, wandering through the hallway, and that's when she realized that it wasn't me too. I lived in the house just me and my father for about 4 years. Every time I was alone, didn't matter if it was day or night, I heard it walk around the house. And sometimes when I sat on the couch watching a movie, my father's door would open behind me and it walked from the room to stand right behind my back. Sometimes it would put its hand on my shoulder, I think, because I would sort of feel it standing behind me and then feel this warm sort of tickling sensation on my shoulder at a shape of a palm. Weirdly though, the man just never seemed to come to my sister's old room. It would stand in front of the doorway, but it would never seemingly step into that room. It was like the only room in the whole house that seemed to be out of its reach for some reason. But the man had done something to everyone who had come to our house by this point. Middle of the day, it touched my grandma's shoulder. It would yank everyone's feet who had fallen asleep on the couch. It would hit walls or just wander around the house. I found it kind of amusing that people who didn't believe in ghosts would always be absolutely terrified out of their mind, and started to believe after spending some time in this house. Before I moved back to my mum's place at 16 years old, I guess I wasn't really scared of it anymore. It didn't hurt me or anything like that, and who knows, maybe it was just checking up on me that I was alright when I was a kid or something. I'm 20 years old now and live in a different city. My dad lives in the house by himself now, but every time that I visit him, I just know that that man is still there. If there would be a way to get him from my father's home to my place, honestly, I think I might even do it at this point. As weird as it seems, I guess I just kind of grew fond of it, and I kind of miss having it around. My girlfriend and I were graduate students, living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments. The whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus, but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had laid-back bohemian sort of vibes. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. So it was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was post 3 a.m. I had just finished a movie, I turned the TV off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm at this point, so the ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder, and it was freezing. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend was always complaining about me forgetting to lock the door, and as was my habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed though, and just as I was falling asleep, I thought that I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. Moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking. Now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong. I told her that I thought that I heard something, and then we both heard what sounded like someone stumbling onto our couch. We shot up and I yelled, "Is someone there?" No answer. The floor creaked again. This time in unison we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise. I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon, but there was nothing. Growing up, my dad always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting this practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if one of my buddies was playing a prank on me. That seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour on a weekday night and during a snowstorm. What I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in. My girlfriend yelled, "Who's out there?" More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to our bedroom now. We heard the growl again, but this time it was followed by a gurgle, and it's Matt. We didn't know any Matts, at least not any that would enter an apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend, and I had never seen someone so scared. If worst came to worst, I thought to myself, well, I know I can outrun her. I hoped it didn't come to that. "Matt who?" we shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. I turned on the lights and walked into the family room, and there he stood, a 6'2", slovenly-looking college kid. Matt was blacked out, drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pre-game party at their apartment apparently, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartments. Their door was locked and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he had sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment that he could find. I told him that he scared us and that he had to go. He stepped outside and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, though, I learned that Matt had, unfortunately, frozen to death. He'd been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean-to garage. My father lived with us for a while, 6 months prior to passing away, in fact. Long story short, my father was a drug addict who became violent and had to be forced from our home. This led to us not speaking to him for the last few months of his life. He didn't pass away peacefully. Since his death, my family has experienced 3 more losses. Our home has become a place of constant sadness and negative energy. The last few months, we've been experiencing some strange happenings too. So, my father installed our ceiling fan, and it had always turned itself on sporadically. After his passing, it started happening at least once a day, turning on full blast, in conjunction with the TV turning on as well. My father put a small screw in the back of the remote to keep the battery cover on. I would set the remote down on the table, turn my back, and then the TV and the fan would turn on. Sometimes it would take me turning the TV off several times for it to stay off as well. This stopped happening after my mum cancelled cable and returned the remote to the provider. The ceiling fan also went back to only turning on sometimes, and I know that this could easily be explained as electrical or wiring issues, but I just bring it up because maybe it's related. In any case, we have my father's ashes on top of the china cabinet, and we had some photos of him around it. The photos kept falling off with no explanation. My mum took the photos down after a framed picture of her and him fell and shattered, ruining the photo. He found the photo in storage shortly before he was removed from our home, in fact. When my partner and I are home alone, we've also both heard cabinet drawers slamming. The front and the back doors sometimes slam as well, and what sounds like a drawer opening and being rummaged through, then slams shut as well. Chairs can be heard being pushed in and out, but when investigated, nobody is ever there. The cats and the dog will be asleep in another room or where we're in our sight, and several times when I've showered while home alone, I'll hear voices in the house, and they seem to react to this. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye too, and the other day I briefly saw a brown outline of a person in my kitchen. This didn't happen prior to my father's passing, mind you, which is why I give all this context. But yesterday was my aunt's funeral. She passed young and suddenly. We have all taken it kind of hard, I guess, but last night my partner and I were sitting on the back porch for a few hours just talking. And as I was mid-sentence, we suddenly heard footsteps and what sounded like a loud growling sound that was getting closer. We both immediately got up and ran inside because we felt this primordial sense that I was in danger. It made my heart beat fast and my hair stand up on the back of my neck. I didn't see anything after looking around 10 minutes later. The growl also sounded like it came from a human. But the yard is fenced in, and the gate on the side of the yard, the noise that comes from it when you unlock it, it's pretty much impossible to miss. And the other gate was in view of us, so if someone had jumped the fence, we would have heard it. We were outside for 2 hours, and my dog had been out with us as well. If a person had been out there, then she would have ran up to them for sure as well. If it had been an animal, she would have been trying to run at it or alert us to it for sure. She's a hunting breed and has done so before. But we talked to my mum, and she's had a similar experience in the yard as well. We can't figure out what it could be, can't think of a plausible explanation, but something tells me that all of this is somehow related. When I was like 16 or so, I'm now 24, female from England, I was sat in my conservatory on the phone to a friend. My conservatory looks out onto my decking, which is followed by my garden. My mum was out in the garden hanging the washing out, and my dad was sat gardening slightly further up. I could see them both. On my decking, we have a large wooden table and a bench set for sort of hosting outside with. You can see through the wood of the benches as there are gaps between the panels. And now, this next part makes me sound so crazy, but I know that I saw it, and I just cannot explain it, and it drives me nuts. So when I got off the phone with my friend, I saw an extremely pale, disembodied hand pop up from behind the top of the back bench. It just shot up, fingers spread wide, kind of like jazz hands, I guess. It then started frantically waving at me and then put its index finger into a point gesture and started rotating its wrist really fast, and then would point left and right and then back to a wave. The whole ordeal lasted about maybe 10 seconds, and I must have blinked and then it was gone. I could see though that there was no one there, and I sat in complete shock for about a minute, wondering what the heck I just saw. My parents, who were busy, were also oblivious to this happening. I walked out to the garden soon after. I was so on edge and mouth wide open and stuff, and mentioned it to my mum, who I think just thought that I was making things up. I'm really not sure, but I've mentioned it since, and the more I've spoken about it, the more I think that she believes me, because what a random and specific thing to lie about, right? I didn't even bother telling my dad because I knew that he wouldn't believe me for a second. But I think about this situation regularly and have moments where I question if this was just my imagination, as it really just makes zero sense. Plus, nothing has happened to me like this before or after this event too. Somehow though, I know deep down that I saw this disembodied hand as clear as day, and I'm wondering if anybody else has had any similar experiences. Do let me know too, so that I can feel slightly less insane than I already do. I live in a pretty small rural village in Germany. Less than 200 people live here. Not much around here too, besides fields, forest, cows, sheep, a donkey and maybe 2 horses. But directly outside of the house that I live in is a road to the right which leads into a field, and then into a pretty thick forest. The route that I usually take is around maybe 18 kilometers long, or 11 miles for the US listeners. I'll simply stick to miles to keep it simple too, but it doesn't sound like much, but the route is very rough. It's uphill almost the entire time, and the forest has no roads, so you actually walk through rough terrain with thick tree roots and bushes, etc. Anyway, I walk this exact route 1 to 2 times per week, and usually when it's already dark outside. I wear a headlamp for when it's too cloudy out and the moon isn't nicely visible, so I don't trip or get hurt. Why at evening or nighttime, you ask? Because I'm usually on the phone with a good friend talking, and we live very far apart. It's day for her when it's night for me, and I don't mind because that way I just don't feel alone hiking. Also, here's a bit of an information dump because it's pretty important. For people who are not familiar with German forests, the most dangerous thing that you may encounter is a wild boar, so it's usually pretty safe to just wander around. There's almost no wolves where I'm at, and even if, they would be way too shy to just show themselves. Bears are not a thing here. Also, no crazy people living inside the forest too. The only thing that you really encounter is the farmer, who drives up like 1 to 2 miles into the road to check out on the livestock. And after that, it's all forests, no fields anymore anyway. So, headlamp on, AirPods in, talking to my friend, catching up. For the first 5 miles or so, nothing weird happened. I even had the headlamp off, and though I wore it on my head, the moon was making enough light, and once your eye sort of adjusted to the dark, you could see quite well. As long as you don't sprint around the forest, you should be okay. Though, once I was in the deeper part of the forest, my AirPods started making weird sounds, almost like I was losing connection or something. But I could hear her voice still, and it was more like a background buzzing, I guess. It wasn't actually interfering with my call or anything, but this buzzing went on, and after about 20 minutes or so, I suddenly noticed that I couldn't really see as well anymore as I was able to just moments ago. The moon seemed to be blocked by clouds or something, but these clouds didn't look like normal clouds. They sort of looked like thick walls of fog, just way higher than the fog should be. I know it's hard to picture, but clouds usually look fluffy or thinned out. These seemed heavy and almost wet. It's hard to describe, but I told my friend to hold on for a minute because I had to focus on something. I don't know why I said that, but focusing on her talk was disrupting my view, I guess, for whatever reason. Sensory overload, I guess. But the thing that I had to focus on was a huge, thick, deep black cloud. It kind of pushed itself through the fog like clouds and positioned itself right over me, almost as if it was trying to throw a shadow around an area that I was in. Then, the cloud also started to swirl in the middle slightly, and that was when my connection just fell flat. I got the beeping sounds that you get when you lose connection, and my phone call was now gone. No more bars and no more data, nothing. But my AirPods were still buzzing like crazy in my ears. That was when I felt uneasy, neck hair standing up, cold sweats on my back, and I started turning around to leave because the way ahead just seemed a lot more dark and sinister than my way back. And the moment that I turned around and started, well, slightly jogging back because I felt scared, was when I started to hear what I can only describe as like bell sounds. Almost like church bells, but the sound was deeper. That sort of typical ring that you hear after a bell sound was just struck in the air, and it was giving me this weird sensation as if my bones were suddenly rubbing up against each other. It was extremely freaky, and all I remember is that I started to go from walking back to jogging back to running back, trying to leave the forest and go back to the fields where you start this journey. I didn't look back while running, but I could hear the bell sound getting weaker the further away that I got, and the fog-like clouds that I saw before were becoming less and less until I finally left the forest and I was back to a normal sky, thin clouds and the moon. once I got back home, I simply undressed, went into the shower, and after that, I went to bed, thinking that I was just simply spooked or something today, or maybe I was just exhausted and my brain went haywire or something. I let it go. But I don't know. I never saw a cloud like that in my life, and the church bells are not a thing late at night inside a abandoned forest like this too. I never went back to hike that route again, and I never told anyone because, well, it's pretty embarrassing to share something like this, right? But I had to think of it today, and I thought that I would share it in the hope that maybe someone can tell me what this is. About 3 years ago, I was 38 weeks pregnant. My husband and I, we lived in what we called our village, and it was basically 2 dead-end streets off of a highway with forests beyond the streets, at the end of them that is, and a small local store at the corner of one street. We called it the village because our trailer park neighbours were my aunt, uncle and cousin's trailer, and then my husband's brother and nieces. Then my grandma's house was on the next street over. My other aunt, uncle and cousins lived with her at the time as well, and my husband and I were 21 then. So my best friend Ray was visiting from college and had spent the night with me. The next day, we decided to walk up my street, down the highway past the store, then down by my grandma's street and back through the woods to my house. This was to try to help to get labour started, as my pregnant belly was huge at that point and my back hurt often. We were talking while I sort of hobbled with her down the highway when a white truck rode by rather slowly. I knew the speed limit was 55 and this dude had to be going like 30. Through the driver's window, I saw a bald white man, maybe in his 50s, sort of rubbernecking at us. At this time it looked like there might have been someone else in the passenger seat too. The truck was kind of old, but I didn't know the year, make or model or see the plate or anything. Ray was talking and unbothered until I said, "Hey, that guy just went by really slow and I don't think that was anyone that I know." She replied with something like, "Oh, I didn't even notice that." We were now halfway to the store as well, and it was less than 2 minutes later when we saw him coming back from the other direction. I said, "Hey, that's him again, get in the grass." Since we were on what would have been the right side, we went down the slope of the grass off the road. We're still in front of the people's houses because the section of the highway is sort of lined with residences between the dead-end streets. He passes us slowly again. When I turn to look behind us, he's slowing down even more, finds a spot and starts to turn the truck around. I told Ray to run, so we ran, and I was doing the best that I could being super pregnant. We thought about going into the store, but decided to head for my grandma's up the other street instead. Her house was up the hill at the end, but it wasn't a long run by any means. When we got up the hill, I looked back again to see his truck pulling into the store parking lot. We continued to run, got to my grandma's where she and my aunt were sitting at the table and told them what just happened. My aunt made a police report. I was afraid to at first, thinking that maybe I was just being paranoid. I mean, what if it was someone that I knew and they were just trying to say hi and maybe it was just a waste of the police's time. Turns out though that there had been other reports of a man creeping around the neighborhoods. Someone in another trailer park down the highway reported that her kids were outside playing when a man emerged from the woods trying to lure one of them to him. They hollered for their mum and supposedly she came out and threatened him, so he ran off. But it continues. You see, a few more times we think that we see this truck, but we're not sure if it's him since one of the residents also has a white truck too. My family had yet to see the truck, so they couldn't identify it. But at some point when I wasn't home, a few of my cousins were playing outside. Their ages ranged from 10 to 15. And this time, the truck came rolling down our little street past them. He turned around at the end, came back up and stopped next to them. They said that he was apparently trying to lure my 11-year-old cousin to the truck, but he said no and they all ran back to my aunt's house. We had talked with the children about what was going on in the neighborhood lately, so thankfully they knew what to do. One more thing happened though before the report stopped. I had my baby at 40 weeks and my husband and his friend, the baby and I, were home one day. The baby was about a week old when we got a call from my aunt at my grandma's house that they had seen the man real up close and personal. My 2 female teen cousins were in their room. It was getting dark out, but for some reason my cousin went out to open the blinds to the window, and there was the man squatting on the AC unit staring at them. They screamed and he jumped off and ran into the woods behind the house. My aunt called the police. My husband and his friend later went out with guns and flashlights to search for him in the woods, but they didn't find him. I believe that he was parking his truck somewhere and then stalking houses from the forest perhaps, but my husband and I actually used to walk through those woods and never had any issues as it was private land that we had permission to walk on. But it also seems that this man did not have a preference for age or gender or anything. He seemed to be looking for anyone that he could get for whatever sick reason that he had in mind. There had been police sent to patrol the highway or sit on the side of the road waiting since then, keeping an eye out for him throughout those weeks, but they never did catch him. I still wonder sometimes, though, if he was someone from out of town, and I hope maybe somewhere he gets busted before something bad happens. We might never know, but I truly do hope for it. To set the scene, it was November 27th, and I'm walking through the woods to avoid interacting with guests, like the average antisocial teenager that I am. I have one of my uncle's dogs with me, Duke, a 150-pound Great Dane. We were passing through a clearing at the time and taking a walk. I state the size and breed of the dog to demonstrate how out of character his behavior will be too. But as we get about halfway through the clearing, he begins to walk slower and sort of begins to whine a bit. I assume that he must have hurt his paw or something, so I check him over but find nothing. I turn around and in my flashlight beam I can see a pair of eyes about maybe 4 feet off the ground, significantly taller than anything with eye shine in my area. I understandably freak out at this and start to back away a bit. But then the most horrifying thing happens. Whatever it was, it stands up. Whatever was watching me is now over 6 feet tall easily, and then it seemed to talk. It said help, I think, with no emotion or cadence behind it. Duke is losing his mind trying to get away, and I decide that that's a pretty reasonable plan at this point. As we're running through the forest trying to get back to our house, I can hear this thing saying help, help, help over and over again, always with about 5 seconds apart. We eventually make it back to the house and we immediately get inside. For the next few nights, if I looked out my window, I could have sworn that I saw those same eyes gazing back at me from those woods. I don't know what it was. I've heard stories of skinwalkers, wendigos, or whatever it is, but whatever it was, I hope that I never see it again. To answer some questions as well that I'm sure you'll have, this occurred in northern Oklahoma. There was no discernible gender to the voice that I could make out. There was no discernible evidence when I went back the next day as well to have a look around. No footprints and nothing that I could spot anyway. But then again, I am definitely no tracker or anything. So there recently was a thread on Reddit about what made you believe in ghosts, and I'll start with the same context many probably have said before, but I was an extremely skeptical individual. I believe that the majority of events that occur can be explained by logical explanations or something other than the paranormal. That was until both myself and wife had our experiences with several unexplained events. I want to context that these events have changed both my wife and myself's views on many things, including the paranormal. These events took place around maybe 6 years ago now. So my wife and I were staying at my father's house after he passed away. Everybody in the family spoke about the house being haunted as long as I can remember. Personally, I'd never had anything weird happen prior to this, and overall just chalked it up to that side of the family being overzealous storytellers. But we were at the house for around a week to help clean it out, as it was around 6 hours away from where we lived. And there were several weird events leading to the final event that changed myself and wife forever. To give better context, the house itself was a postage stamp style Victorian house with 2 floors and a semi-finished apartment style attic. I was going up into the attic to work on cleaning out some stuff my father had up there. He was an avid collector of NASCAR die-cast and other collectibles, and things were pretty much everywhere. On my way up the steps, I was on my phone with my wife, who had went to get some food, when I saw the handle on the attic door twist and the door slightly open. This area where we're in is not necessarily dangerous, but was far from nice, and I instantly thought that somebody had broken in and immediately ran up to investigate. I searched everywhere and I couldn't find anyone. In retrospect, I know it was idiotic to go up there alone, as if someone was up there, I was not prepared to handle it or anything. Grief makes emotions just dull, I guess, including fear. The second event was that my wife, myself, and my childhood friend were in the same attic cleaning out items. In the attic, there was this thick old shag carpet that had been there from like the 70s. Since it was a semi-finished attic, one room was for storage and is where my buddy was working. I look at my wife at some point, who literally just points at the door. And we both watched the door for that room close slowly on my buddy. But there was zero reasoning or explanation for how this happened, as we both saw it and the door itself took a large amount of force to actually close it. Obviously, my buddy was pretty unhappy and we both just sort of said sorry, forgot you were in there to avoid him thinking both of us were losing our minds or scare him or something. Now, the last night that we stayed there, we slept on the second floor in the master bedroom. The bedroom itself was positioned so that the headrest of the bed's wall was sort of aligned with a set of chairs coming up. The wall and the stairs were about maybe 3 to 15 feet difference in height, depending on the location, and that's an important piece to what ended up happening too. So throughout the night, my wife kept waking me up to say that someone was walking around on the platform landing outside. I looked and did see what looked like a shadow under the door frame, so I immediately opened the door and braced for what I assumed was an intruder. But again, there was nothing there, even after searching the house extensively. Later that night, I'm awoken to sounds of scratching in the wall behind my head. My wife is already awake and looking at me oddly and sort of terrified as she hears it too. I assume that it's a rat or some type of animal, and while weird that it was directly behind me, it wouldn't be far-fetched to possibly believe that it was just some critters in the house, because the house certainly had them. So in a sort of tired rage, I turn around and just punch the wall to scare it off. But within a second, something punches back on the wall with such force that it shakes the entire thing. We both then hear footsteps stomping or running away from us and up the attic stairs. At this moment, we're both at a loss for words, and we immediately pack up with our son and we just leave. We even called the police and just assumed that it has to be someone who broke in, until the next day when we started to think about it. You see, the area where the scratching was occurring was above those steps, a good 10 feet, and even an extremely tall man would have trouble reaching with a ladder. However, even if they could reach, what we couldn't explain is how this thing ran on a floor that literally didn't exist. The sound of running was not up steps, but as if there was a hallway or a floor or something directly behind the wall, which obviously there wasn't. The police, they found no signs of a break-in or of any intruder being there. The security cameras, the ring outside, never had any alerts or saw anyone coming in either. And so, in the end, we just ended up selling the house as is with everything in it, and never stayed over there again. I did come down briefly a few weeks later to finish up some final business and just went to tell my father goodbye at the house. And upon entering, the house just, I don't know, it felt so hateful is the only way that I can describe it. I don't understand how a house could have feelings, but if someone was to ask me what I felt, hateful is the word that I would use. I have no idea to this date what any of it was anyway. But to clarify, had I not been in such a state of grief, I would never have investigated nor stayed after the first event. But my dad always brushed off the other family members' claims to it being haunted as no big deal, and even in my childhood years visiting, I never once had an odd experience. My dad and I had a good relationship throughout his life, and He never talked about the house in a negative light. The house was built in 1879 by a French family, and after them, my family owned it from 1952 and on. Nothing traumatic ever happened there, nor any weird family events. It was just a plain old boring house prior to that week. But I'm wondering, how has everyone else coped with a truly unexplainable event like this? My wife and I still to this day cannot even talk about it without getting chills or just literally feeling insane. This night, I was hanging out with 3 friends, Sarah, Nick, and Mary. We were celebrating Nick's birthday at his place, which happened to have a hot tub in the backyard. After a couple of hours and a couple of too many beers, we jokingly suggested skinny dipping in the hot tub as some kind of birthday present. It would have probably stopped there too if it wasn't for our drunkenness, but eventually we just said, let's do it. Now, for context, Nick's house was by a forest and was very isolated from neighbors. Adding to that, it was maybe past midnight, and anything past the Christmas lights of dubious quality that were spread around the yard was basically pitch black. Being absolute cowards, going out there without Nick's parents' home would have been unimaginable if it hadn't have been for the wonders of inebriation. So, semi-reluctantly, I followed my friends into the night with a towel on my shoulder. We reached the hot tub that was worryingly close to the edge of the woods, and we started stripping. Everything was fine for the next 30 minutes or so, apart from the occasional branch cracking. But we were having fun, telling stories or rambling about stupid stuff, and the fear quickly faded away. That was, until a deafening shriek came from the darkness of the forest, lasting for about 5 seconds. It sounded like a human voice too, but it almost didn't sound like a person. We all turned livid, being silent for what seemed like hours, and I even saw Nick lose his boner in a matter of seconds. We didn't dare try to look into the forest, except Mary, who just grew a pair of balls out of nowhere and picked up her phone to use the flashlight. We couldn't help but follow the light too as she pointed it at the forest, who seemed unaffected by it, as if the darkness was sort of swallowing it. But there was nothing. As we were about to stop looking though, the void stared back at us. Mary shined her light far behind Sarah, and it reflected a pair of eyes and a white form in the distance. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We instantly rushed out of the tub without giving a single thought about gathering our clothes. Mary and I screamed. Apparently her balls had been blown to smithereens at this point, and we all ran towards the back entrance as fast as possible. Nick immediately got a knife while we locked every door and window. We wanted to call Nick's parents or the police or anyone, but our phones were over by the forest where we'd left them in our clothes. Seeing no other choice, Nick put shoes on and made a run for it. He managed to get his phone, but he'd heard loud breathing coming from the forest, meaning that whatever or whoever was there hadn't left. And what followed were the worst 2 hours of my life. Nick got his parents to make their way home, handed us towels, and so we could finally cover ourselves. We gathered in the basement where there were no windows. We spent most of the time in silence, waiting for something to happen. And half an hour in, we heard another shriek, more distant this time. Only this time, it was shortly followed by knocks on the door that couldn't possibly be Nick's parents. Sarah actually started crying at this point, but thankfully, nothing else happened after that. The parents arrived and allowed us to sleep in the basement for safety. They hadn't heard or seen anything, and were pretty sure that we just imagined stuff. We hardly slept that night, and once the morning came, we went out to get our stuff. The phones, keys, wallets were all there. The only things missing, though, were Nick's shirt and Sarah and Mary's panties. I wasn't wearing any that night. So that left us with 2 possible scenarios. A weird, pale pervert spied on us in an isolated area deep in the woods, or whatever other creepy stuff roams in there just decided to spook us that night. I often wonder which one it was. I think about this a lot, and I truly think that I might have stopped a kidnapping just by being in a parked car. So my ex-boyfriend, he lived with me for over a year, and there was a period of time where his truck was acting up, so I would pick him up from work and stuff like that. He worked just down the road from my place at a liquor store, so he'd get out at around 10 p.m. on weeknights. One night he asks me to pick him up, and I agree. I get all swaddled in my pajamas and drive down to grumpily wait for him, since my bedtime was around 10 p.m. due to my job and all that. I parked my car in the small parking lot out front. His liquor store is sort of sandwiched between an adult shop and a head shop, party central I guess, but by now the head shop and the liquor store are closed, so their thirds of a lot are mostly empty. The adult shop only had one other car in front of it, and outside the liquor store is my car and one other, 3 total cars, with a woman standing outside of it sitting on her hood. I didn't think much of it. I mean, maybe she was waiting for someone in the adult shop or one of my ex-co-workers just relaxing in the summer night air or something. I sit hunched in my seat, car off, playing on my phone, when I notice a white van. I know, cliche, but I think that's why I noticed it, pull into the lot. It drives sort of slowly, then back out onto the main road. Weird, but maybe they wanted alcohol and saw the store. Weird, but maybe they wanted alcohol and saw that the store was closed. Whatever, I go back to my phone, but I glance at the woman still outside of her car, but move between my car and hers. I'd parked a couple of spots over, so close but not too close. I go back to my phone, when the same white van pulls in again and stops in front of her. I sit up slightly to watch. I'm a true crime nut, what can I say? I'm easily alerted. And watch some guy roll down the van window and sort of lean out to talk to the woman. I pull out my phone to snap a photo of the license plate, again just in case, but I can't really see it. So I turn on my car and go to open the door, but the guy in the van instantly pulls away and leaves, like in a hurry. The woman moves closer to my car as I get out and approach her, ask her what was that, and she says that she doesn't know. He was trying to ask her for directions, but stopped mid-sentence when I turned my car on. I asked her if she's waiting for anyone, and she says kind of. She's been sitting outside the liquor store for 3 hours waiting on a tow truck because she locked her keys inside of her car, and she couldn't leave the car because her puppy was in the back seat. Thankfully, not a hot night. It was a very nice night, in fact, so she was waiting for a tow truck. As her and I are talking, my ex comes out and asks what's up, and so we decide to help her since there was no way that I was leaving her alone now. I have some rope in my car for emergencies, and my ex uses it to basically jimmy her door open, make a lasso and sort of hook it around her door lock and pull it open. It works, and we open the door just as the tow truck pulls in. Her puppy is safe, of course, and we wish her well, and I get back in the car and just tell my ex, you know, I genuinely think that I almost just watched her get kidnapped. So, I need to provide a bit of backstory for this. When I was 11 or 12, I can't quite remember which age, but I moved away from my dad's house to live with my mum and stepdad. I'll spare you the details, but it was basically to escape a less than desirable situation. Anyway, my mum and her boyfriend at the time, who we'll call Elias, the name of a bad guy from one of my favorite shows. My stepdad looks exactly like him too. Rented a house in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. It's all that they could afford at the time, and so, as a result, I went to a pretty rundown school. The teachers and the staff were nice enough, but I've definitely been in more than one scary situation because of this school's location. But I digress. While at this school, I made an assortment of friends, but there was one girl in particular who became my best friend. Her name was Brittany. My new friend was pretty problematic, I guess you could say. She'd talk to a lot of older boys, put herself in less than ideal scenarios, that kind of thing. Turns out she was acting out during her home life too. Much like me, she was being raised by her stepdad and mother. The only difference is, well, there's a lot, but details and Her mum was basically not too keen on her daughter chatting with her biological father, if you catch my drift. Brittany's mum never really disclosed why, but whenever he did come over to talk with Brittany, it was always done under supervision. I only met the guy once. Brittany had invited me over to her house for a sleepover on one occasion, my first time there too, and her dad dropped by unexpectedly. I can't really remember much about what he said to Brittany or how her mum reacted. I'd assumed that it wasn't good, but there is one thing that I can still remember till this day. The minute that he walked in, there was a complete shift in the air. And I'm not talking about tension, but like the hairs on the back of my neck instantly stood up. Like I was prey and there was a wolf nearby. Needless to say, I kept my interactions with Mr. Creepy short and simple, and I kept my distance from him too. That was the only time that I ever met the guy, and I'm very thankful for it too, because, well, fast forward a couple of years, I graduated from that middle school and started high school. I kept in touch with one of my friends, who their name was Rain, but I lost contact with Brittany. I can't exactly remember why. I guess we sort of just stopped talking as much and sort of drifted apart, but Rain and I had met up at a local mall and were at the food court reminiscing about our middle school days. And that's when Rain perked up and asked me if I'd heard about what happened with Brittany. I obviously said no, that me and her sort of lost contact. Rain grinned that familiar way. She was about to give me some juicy gossip and I knew it. I thought she was going to tell me that Brittany got pregnant or something, but boy oh boy, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Brittany's father is an offender, which I didn't know, but back in 2009, he had picked up a street worker and drove her to a motel. I won't go into detail about what had happened, but a young woman lost her life because of this guy. He managed to get away with it for 3 years as well before the police were able to find him. And the way that they accomplished it? Well, the police released video surveillance of his truck and released it to the public. Someone was able to identify who the truck belonged to, and the cops were finally able to work their way from there. And from what I hear, he was charged with first-degree murder and will only spend 7 years in prison, since he spent a few years in jail while the trial took place. It was an extremely sad thing to find out. Brittany and I might have drifted apart, but I can't imagine what she went through and is still going through after what her dad did. I hope that wherever she is, she's doing okay, and I hope that the family who lost their loved one is able to find some peace someday too. What a horrible thing to happen.